Chapter 1, Amsterdam. Don't save me. Don't save me. 'Cause you were never ever there before. You can't save me. No ifs, no maybes. I don't need heroes anymore. The final note soared into the rafters, the drums and strings continuing a beat longer before ending with a flourish. Down below the crowd roared in response, their applause nearly as thunderous as the music they'd come to hear. Izuku Midoriya smiled at the audience, wiping the sweat from his brow with the green kerchief Atsuhiro had given him. He tucked it back into his pocket before addressing his fans. Thank you. Really, you're too kind. I just wanted to thank you all for coming out tonight to support our cause and to protest against this broken system. The heroes have failed us, and we demand they face justice. The roar of the crowd grew louder, cheers and cries mingling with stomps and claps that rang through the warehouse, reverberating off of rusted metal and seeping into cracked concrete. Izuku tapped the side of his mic, signaling for Jean to adjust it to the crowd's volume. Heroes claim to save us, but who do they save? And when do they save them? When they need it, or when it's convenient? Himiko slammed the cymbals in front of her before pounding out a steady beat on her drums. Tell it to Deku. The heroes say want to save us, but we don't need them to, do we? The noise reached a deafening volume, the crowd making their dissent known. There were too many faces to see all of them, but Izuku managed to spot a few closer to the center of the crowd, their expressions uncertain. He leaned forward, the audience doing the same. Some of you might not be ready to say goodbye to heroes. No, don't boo. It's all right, I get it. I just want you to ask yourselves when the last time a hero came to your neighborhood was, and what they did to help the people there. Is a life only worth saving when it's endangered by a villain? I don't think so. I think you all deserve better. The crowd cheered him on, their voices combining into a raucous clangor. Some of the faces he'd seen had disappeared among the fervor, but Izuku spied a few that seemed to be considering his words. This made him smile. He thanked them again and bid them good night, sauntering off stage with his band mates not far behind. Just beyond the view of the stage, Shuichi stood waiting for them with crossed arms. 10 minutes over this time. Izuku had to bite back a smile. Their manager was a stickler for keeping them on schedule. It was good to have someone so punctual managing them, even if it often turned into nagging before long. Sorry, Shuichi. I promise I'll keep it short tomorrow night. How'd we sound? Shuichi was tapping away on his battered tablet, purple strands of hair falling into his face. I've heard worse. Your bassist could use some extra practice, though. There was a groan from behind him as a weight settled atop Izuku's head. No fair, you never criticize Izuku. Rody had made a habit of resting his chin on Izuku's curls, though it seemed he had to crouch down lower and lower to do so as the years went on. It made for a funny sight, particularly when Pino, the brilliantly colored bird manifestation of Rody's quirk, would rest atop his own head. Himiko and Magna brought up the rear, grinning from the post-show adrenaline. That's because Izu's always perfect. Himiko teased, jabbing a finger into Rody's side and cackling as he yelped. Their banter wasn't uncommon after a show, Izuku enjoying the buzz of their teasing washing over him. He could hear the crowd behind him begin to disperse, the warehouse falling eerily silent as the roar that had persisted all night finally quieted. Atsuhiro came rushing over from the bowels of the warehouse, brushes in hand and a manic gleam in his eye. Izuku took an instinctive step backwards, bumping into Rody. What now? I have to make you presentable, the man said, a flurry of powders hitting the freckled boy. The interviewer wants pictures now. This got his attention. Interviewer. Got here 20 minutes ago, Shuichi answered irritably. This is why we have a schedule. Izuku gently pushed Atsuhiro away, straightening his shirt and ruffling his curls. All of us. Just you this time. The guy seems pretty tame, but you know the drill. He nodded. Shuichi directed him to the break room they'd set up earlier in the day, relegating the others to breaking down the equipment. The break room had once been an office, likely the old foreman's from before the warehouse had shut down, with a large black sheet covering the window. Inside, the interviewer was sprawled out across the dingy, battered couch they'd found when scoping out the venue. Himiko had added pink fluffy pillows that clashed a bit with the faded green of the seat, though not as much as the ugly lace she draped over the back of it. Blue eyes opened and found Izuku as he entered, an easy smile slinking across the interviewer's face. Finally, I was beginning to think I'd be waiting here all night. My apologies, he replied evenly, though he eyed the man with suspicion. I hadn't been told I was to be interviewed today. It was possible Shuichi had forgotten about the appointment, but his dedication to his schedule told him otherwise. Probably another tabloid journalist looking to make a scandal out of a simple protest. He stood to shake Izuku's hand. He was tall and lithe with a long chin and messy black hair, though his smile made him handsome in a way. Tanio Takuda, freelance journalist and photographer. Deku, a pleasure. He motioned for Takuda to sit, taking a spot on the ugly couch as the interviewer grabbed a nearby chair. I caught the tail end of your performance. I gotta say, you're a really talented bunch. Izuku gave him a guarded smile. You should speak to the others as well if you have the time. They're the real talent. Takuda's grin never wavered. You're too humble. Those pipes of yours are something else, and those lyrics. I take it you're the mastermind behind them. The lyrics? He'd written them with the help of his band mates as well as the others, but he wasn't sure if that information would help or hurt him. I like to think of our songs as a reflection of how the public feels. We want to amplify the voices of those who've been silenced by the current system and bring about reform through art. How noble! Now Takuda was beginning to sound condescending. There's some concern that your music might be, well, encouraging people to turn to villainy. I'd like to get your thoughts on that. I bet you would. Our music is meant to inspire others to use their voices, not their quirks. We want to change our country's justice system, not destroy it. Perhaps that message would have been clearer if you'd heard more than the tail end of our performance. Takuda's easy smile stretched into a grin. Perhaps, shall we begin? I thought we already had. Touché. The band name is interesting, the Dekus. What does it mean? It's short for Dakunabu useless, the way that many of us feel in our current climate. He'd offered it to his band mates when they first began playing together, still figuring out their instruments and one another. He'd wanted it as his stage name regardless, but was thrilled when his friends happily took up the moniker as well. And your music is a way for everyday citizens to find power in their own voices, right? Izuku's smile became just a bit more genuine. Exactly. We're all Dekus in one way or another. Takuda leaned forward. So I would be right to say that your concerts are equal parts music and protest? You would. Music always has something to say, and the Dekus want to tell Japan it has a voice of its own, one that doesn't need heroes to speak for it. Takuda pulled a small notebook from his jacket, scribbling down his notes quickly. His expression was intent, his eyes flicking up to meet Izuku's briefly before returning to his notes. There's been some controversy surrounding your group, with concerns over your anti-establishment views and the crowds you're able to amass at a moment's notice. We can't help that we're popular. Takuda's grin turned mischievous. Guess not. The questions were tame after that, focusing on the band's underground success, their future goals and the skills of each member. Himiko's a beast on the drums, Izuku said earnestly, and Magna and Rodi are the best guitar players I've ever heard. Really, next to them I'm almost talentless. Takuda took everything in with rapt attention, only breaking eye contact to jot something down in his notebook before returning his gaze to the singer. Izuku praised his team some more, tried not to react when cameras shot forth from Takuda's body to take pictures, and the interview finally came to a close. This has been a real treat, Takuda told him with a lopsided grin. I almost never get to do entertainment pieces anymore, and with this one I get a side of revolution with it. Izuku returned the smile. Takuda was surprisingly easy to like. If you ever want tickets to the full show, just contact our manager, free of charge. Hey, thanks. I think I'll do just that. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Izuku rejoined the others after Takuda's departure, visibly brightening at the sight of two tall figures chatting casually with Rodi. You're back. The two men turned to greet him. Tenko gave the singer a tight hug while Tuya ruffled his green curls. Told you it would only be a few days, brat. Jiren had a job for us. Izuku poked his head out from Tenko's shoulder. Is he here? Next time, the gray-haired man promised, releasing him as Shuichi began tapping his watch impatiently. The group climbed into the rusted old van they used for transporting their equipment, the back half of the vehicle crammed full of instruments and wires and trunks. Tuya deftly took the keys from an affronted Magna, only smirking in response. It was a tight squeeze with 8 people in the back, with Himiko taking Magna's lap and Izuku taking Rodi's. Shuichi sat in Atsuhiro's, silently daring anyone to comment. Their favorite restaurant was empty by the time they'd sauntered in, only a few regulars perched at the bar. The owner, Mr. Sawayama, was a kindly old man who kept the place running at all hours, capitalizing on the city's bustling nightlife. He greeted them with drinks and his usual chastisements. Late night again? You'll fall over dead from the lack of sleep. Mark my words. Tuya scoffed. You're one to talk. Isn't 5 p.m. the standard bedtime for someone your age? Sawayama gave him a playful smack, demanding the pierced man respect his elders. They bickered as one of the employees came to take orders for the table, bustling back to the kitchen without another word. Sawayama was kind to his employees but incredibly strict, as Rodi had declared after working for him one summer. Are Roro and Lala upstairs? Rodi asked him once Sawayama finished his lecture. Sleeping, my wife stuffed them full of cabbage and sent them to bed. She says you don't feed them enough. We feed them plenty, Izuku remarked with a smile. But thank you for looking after them. After they'd ate and drank and squabbled with the owner some more, the band collected the children from a cooing Mrs. Sawayama in the apartment above the restaurant and bid their farewells, departing for home. Izuku shared his comfortable apartment with Rodi, his siblings, and Himiko, though she preferred to stay with the others in their rooms above Tenko's bar farther downtown. They said their goodbyes as the rest of the band sped off, the tires on their old van squealing against the asphalt. He drives worse than Magna, Rodi muttered, hefting Lala onto his shoulder. Once inside, the children retired to their room without complaint, leaving the older boys to complete their nightly rituals. The television played softly in the background as Izuku prepared Roro and Lala's lunches for the next day. So softly he almost missed the mention of the Dekus. He turned up the volume, urging Rodi to join him. And in entertainment news, the underground punk band, the Dekus, have released their second album last week to rave reviews. The controversial group has garnered quite the cult following with its unique sound and tendentious lyrics. It's not yet clear whether they'll be scheduling a nationwide tour, but be sure to keep your eyes peeled and your ears open if they do. Izuku beamed. It warmed his heart to see their hard work paying off after nearly 4 years. He was about to turn the device off when a news bulletin appeared. A rather severe man with horns and glasses providing updates on a robbery. No suspects have been found at this time. Local law enforcement have teamed up with renowned hero. Izuku switched off the television, his nose crinkling in distaste. Since when do heroes get involved with petty theft? Rodi laughed. You mean besides their own? Neither of them were particularly keen on heroes, nor were any of their band mates, each and everyone having too many reasons to distrust them. They'd seen many crimes ignored by both heroes and law enforcement, deemed unworthy of their attention unless there was profit or renown to be gained from their intervention. Izuku spared a glance to the hallway. They tried to keep their disparaging remarks out of earshot of the children who, while not hero-crazy like most children, still held a good deal of respect for them. Might be the robbers stole something important to the heroes, Rodi commented idly. Some fancy tech or state secrets or something. Izuku supposed it was a good thing the heroes were doing their jobs as opposed to simply talking about it, but couldn't find it in him to be grateful to them. He let out a hum, turning back to the kitchen. Whatever. Let them have their glory while it lasts. Chapter 2. Ban all the music. The Dekus' next performance took place a week later. The crowd nearly doubled in size from their last. The warehouse they'd chosen had ample space, yet every inch of the pit below the stage was crammed with people. Izuku wondered if it was the mention they'd received on the local news or Takuta's glowing review in a rather prominent entertainment magazine that had drawn in the crowd, sending a silent thanks to both. He could feel the music pulsing around him, slamming into the roars and cheers of the audience. Himiko hit her cymbals, sending a jolt through the singer's spine. He let out a wail in response, his voice ringing high and clear above the music. The audience responded with equal fervor, the sounds clashing one moment, then melding the next. It was raw and honest, and to Izuku it was everything. They reached the last song of the night, after which Izuku would address the crowd and remind them of what the Dekus stood for: community. The concert protests had been going over well thus far and, with any luck, would generate enough conversations outside of the dingy warehouses to start making change, real change, with demonstrations outside of agencies and government buildings, with flyers papering the streets and flashing across the screens towering over the city. But he was getting ahead of himself. Izuku steadied the mic, smiling brilliantly at the crowd. Like the performance before, Izuku saw a myriad of different people squished in together, some eager to hear him speak, others wary of it. He knew he could win them over, could meet their concerns with understanding and their hesitance with determination. Thank you for coming out tonight. We love sharing our music with all of you, don't we guys? Damn right, Himiko called out in response, her cheeks pink from exertion. We've got one last song for you tonight, one I think you'll want to hear. Rody began plucking out the first few notes, an easy smile on his face. He had his hair loose around his face instead of his usual pulled-back style, the thick brown strands a match for Magna's. Pino was nestled atop his head, her colorful feathers a stark contrast to Rody's dark clothing. The song began to pick up and Izuku joined the instruments, his voice ringing out clear and strong. The audience had quieted some, enjoying the beat but focusing on the lyrics. Don't save me. Don't save me. 'Cause you were never ever there before. So many people had been let down by heroes, had been betrayed by them at one point or another. The singer knew that feeling well and, after so many years of letting it consume him, began to nurture it through his music. A quick glance to his band mates confirmed they felt the same. It wasn't enough to dislike the heroes, not for them. The Dekus wanted change, and they were determined to make it. They played out the song perfectly, having practiced it over and over again to make sure every note, every beat conveyed their message. When it ended, the crowd roared, bringing a smile to Izuku's face. He addressed the crowd once again, thanking them for coming and beginning his speech. Heroes are paid through government stipends that would better serve the people through public works projects, building schools and hospitals and housing in low-income neighborhoods. Woohoo! Our streets are flooded with heroes all vying to make a name for themselves. Yet none are ever present in areas that need them most. A hero only comes to poor districts to collect bodies, and that's only if they're collecting policemen or other heroes. I know that's right, yeah. We have to divest ourselves of this over-reliance on heroes. They had their time to champion our country, but that time has passed. Now we want our power back. Oh yeah, Puweer. There were often cheers and responses to his words at these concerts, yet the loud guy in the center of the crowd was the only one currently making noise. Izuku was struck then by how odd he was dressed compared to the rest of the attendees. A red and white polo with the collar popped and blue jeans far nicer than one would expect for this kind of venue. His face was chiseled but plain and his blonde hair was swept into a pompadour. He was standing shoulder to shoulder with a guy dressed in all black, with messy dark hair and a morose expression. So his boyfriend brought him here. Feeling curious, Izuku called out to him. I'm so glad you agree with me, sir. What's your name? You can call me Mirio, and this here is Tamaki. The other man groaned. Don't draw attention to me. It's too much. Izuku couldn't help but smile. They were a cute couple. Welcome to the show, you two. I hoped you've enjoyed it. We have, Mirio called out, a bright grin on his face. You guys really killed it. Off to the side, Izuku could see Shuichi tapping his watch with impatience. Unfortunately, we have to end the night here. Thank you all again for coming out. Before he could finish, the glass skylights shattered, raining sharp points onto the crowd. A young woman flew into the warehouse, held aloft by swirls of electricity. Whoops, sorry about that. Is anyone hurt? The lighting in the rafters was poor, but with the woman's quirk active it was all too easy to spot her flashy costume illuminated like a star above them. Heroes! Someone in the crowd yelled. Shit, this is a raid. Lemillion, Sun Eater, we gotta hurry, she called out, diving down to grab someone. The audience had begun to panic, pushing and shoving in their haste to get out. They were met by a swarm of heroes and policemen pushing them back and grabbing anyone they could. Izuku watched the commotion with incredulity. Heroes were breaking up peaceful protests now. "Stop it!" he yelled into the mic, the sound grating against the metal walls and ringing out sharply. "This is a concert, not a gang meeting. Let those people go." He was grabbed from behind and forced to face Shuichi. "You gotta run, Izuku. Get out of here." The singer realized Magna and Toga had fled the stage, and a quick look to the rafters confirmed Jean had abandoned his post as well. Only Shuichi and Rody remained with him. "What? But Dash?" "But nothing. You two need to get back to your apartment fast." Izuku's eyes widened, turning to meet Rody's equally frightened expression. Roro and Lala were with the Sawayamas again. "The kids!" Pino let out a pitiful chirp, urging the three to move. Shuichi led them backstage quickly, navigating the dark, narrow hallways with ease. He reached the back door and flung it open to shoo the other two out, only to be met with armed policemen. "Freeze!" Shuichi slammed into the two men, screaming at Izuku and Rody to run. Rody slammed the door shut as Shuichi grappled with the policeman, leaving him to his fate. "To the roof, then." Izuku was astonished at his friend's behavior. "What? Why did you?" "The others will find him," Rody said firmly, grabbing Izuku by the arm. "And the kids still need us." Izuku couldn't fault Rody for prioritizing his younger siblings, but neither could he condone leaving their friend and manager to fight alone. Still, he followed the taller boy to the roof, then leapt to the nearest building and ran. The night was hot and humid, summer heat radiating off of the brick and concrete that surrounded them. It had been some time since either of them had to navigate dingy rooftops in the dilapidated parts of the city. The memories of leaping between buildings and running through Mizudafu under the light of the moon echoing with each of their footsteps. Rody kept a pace ahead of Izuku, he and Pino scanning for heroes and law enforcement. As they neared the next rooftop, a blur shot through the ground, knocking Izuku back and separating the two boys. The talkative blonde from the crowd was grinning at him. "Found you." He'd shed his polo and jeans for a blue and white hero suit, the number 1,000,000 emblazoned on his chest in yellow. He was floating an inch off the ground, looking the very picture of a cocky, irritating hero. Izuku threw a punch, only for his fist to phase through his target completely. "Sorry, but that's not going to war." Izuku launched himself forward, once again slipping through the body in front of him with ease. He rolled and shot back to his feet quickly, leaping to the next building to reach Rody. "Keep running," he told his friend. "No matter what, you have to keep moving." Rody frowned and Pino squawked in protest. "I'm not leaving you." "You have to." Izuku snapped back, the two running as fast as they could. "You're faster than me and you're better at blending in. If they catch up to us again, you have to get away. Like you said, Roro and Lala need you." He doubted much would come from their arrests, but detainment could last days if law enforcement willed it so. Roro and Lala needed stability, something only their big brother could provide them. Rody's face twisted, but he nodded, jaw set in grim acceptance. The hero caught up to them once again, grabbing Izuku by the ankle and pulling him to the ground. Rody yelled out, but Izuku shook his head, willing the other boy to keep running. Rody did take off after a moment, Pino only following at Izuku's urging. The hero held him tight, tapping a communicator in his ear. "I've captured one of the targets, sir. Permission to dash." In his preoccupation, he'd neglected to keep the rest of his body intangible, and was thus unprepared for Izuku's other foot smashing into his nose. The hero let out a yelp of pain and reflexively released his hold on his target, clutching at the bloody appendage. Izuku scrambled to his feet and took off again, choosing a different direction than Rody. He knew it was unlikely he'd make it very far and wanted to give his friend as much time to distance himself from the heroes as he could. The blonde hero had yet to give chase, which gave the singer an uneasy feeling. He scrambled down a fire escape and landed on the pavement with a thud, pain jolting through his legs at the impact. He pushed aside the discomfort, running through the cramped alleyways past abandoned buildings and rotting garbage. The trains had already stopped running, which meant the stations were a bad choice. and no cab or bus driver in their right mind would venture to this part of town so late at night. A cafe, he thought, his legs aching and his heart pounding. If I can just make it to an internet cafe, I can hide out for the night. He could hear the commotion happening behind him, the sounds of his supporters and likely his bandmates running, fighting and being captured by the heroes, and police echoing off of brick and asphalt and filling the night air. Every part of him wanted to turn around and fight, to sing or scream or do whatever was necessary to save his friends. He rounded a corner and spotted Jean grappling with the dark-haired man from earlier, now wearing his own hero costume. Tentacles had sprouted from his fingers, the slippery appendages wrapping themselves around Jin's arms and legs. He caught Izuku's eyes on him, giving a small shake of his head when the singer made to help him. The hero spotted him but was ambushed by several of Jin's clones before he could reach for Izuku. He winced, realizing that many of his friends and supporters were likely using their quirks publicly and offensively and giving the heroes further justification to detain them. Despite the anger and shame screaming in his head, Izuku turned on his heel and ran in the opposite direction, not once looking back. He stopped for a moment to catch his breath and get his bearings. If he was correct, the nearest internet cafe would be just a mile away. A noise so soft it was nearly undetectable sounded from his left, the whisper of fabric sliding against brick hissing to him in warning. There was no time to react. Within seconds Izuku felt something yank him backwards, his arms pinned to his sides. He fell to the ground with a hard thump, bits of gravel and asphalt digging into him through his pants. He looked up to see a pair of glowing red eyes boring into him, the rest of his captor hidden in shadow. I got him. Chapter 3 Reflections. Izuku was taken to a nearby police station, the place strangely empty given how many people had been in attendance at the concert. There were a few concert-goers being processed, but none Izuku recognized and no one from his band or production team. He spotted the blonde hero he'd evaded earlier among a cluster of desks, a bloody cloth held up to his nose. Surprisingly, his smile grew even wider when he spotted Izuku. Man, that was some kick, he chirped, uncaring of the blood that still dribbled from his swollen nose. Most people can't get a hit on me, 'cause of my permeation and all, but you got me at just the right moment. Those are some killer instincts. He was crazy, Izuku decided as he hummed in response. There was no sign of his boyfriend from the audience, likely still contending with Jin's clones or some other innocent bystander. But the blonde wasn't alone. Next to him stood a tall and imposing man, taller even than Izuku's captor and very intense. His golden eyes were fixed on the singer, scrutinizing him. When he spoke, the timbre of his voice vibrated out like the purr of an engine. Come Lemillion, we have to return to the agency. Lemillion just kept smiling. Sounds like a plan, sir. Great meet you, Deku. I'll have to get your autograph next time. The hero who'd captured him rolled his eyes. He didn't look anything like the heroes one might normally see on TV or patrolling the streets, who were bright and colorful and loud. This man was fairly nondescript in his dark baggy clothing and messy hair. He was tall but thin, strong but lacking the bulk most heroes had. He looked to be in his late 20s or early 30s, and, if he'd been in the crowd of concert-goers that night, he'd blend in perfectly with the fans Izuku was used to seeing on a regular basis. Why send in the loudmouth when this one could hide so easily among the crowd? Izuku wondered, keeping silent as the man led him into an interrogation room. He took a seat in front of a plain, empty desk, the hero taking a seat opposite him. They stared at one another, neither willing to speak first. Izuku resisted the urge to fiddle with his clothes, his hair, his stage accessories, all too aware of how his anxiety would come across to the hero. He knew he had to keep his composure, despite his fears, if he wanted to get himself and his friends out of this predicament. A few moments later the door opened again, this time a tired man in a worn brown trench coat joining them. He nodded to the hero. Eraserhead. Detective. A detective? Izuku didn't understand why a detective would be called in. There was nothing to investigate. The man laid a file on the desk, taking a seat beside the hero. Good evening. My name is Tsukachi. Deku, Izuku replied shortly. Why am I here? What are the charges? The hero Eraserhead cut in before the detective could. Terrorism. The word hung in the air like a sword above his head. Yet the accusation itself was ridiculous. Izuku barked out a laugh, the sound sharp and dripping with contempt. Terrorism? Really? I know my music is a threat to you and your badly dressed militia, but that's a stretch. Eraserhead narrowed his eyes in response. Don't play dumb. You know this has nothing to do with your music. Tsukachi cut in. Suspected terrorism, and no formal charges yet. We're just looking for some information. They wouldn't be getting anything from him, but Izuku nodded just the same. Tsukachi continued. Your band has been performing for a few years now, correct? Izuku said nothing. And in that time you've begun dabbling in political protest as part of the performances? That was obvious to anyone who knew even passing information about their band. No, the detective was clearly searching for something more. Hearing no response, Tsukachi opened the file he'd brought with him, sliding its contents over to Izuku. Recognize any of these people? The stack of photos was largely comprised of people Izuku had never seen before, at least not well enough to recognize them. There was a man with long dark hair and bangs that shadowed his eyes, a woman with blue skin and lilac-colored hair, a man with graying hair and impossibly small glasses, and— Wait a minute, Izuku said before he could stop himself. That's Koku Hanabata, of the Hearts and Minds Party. The slicked-back hair and charming half-smile in front of him had been plastered all over the city for months as the counselor campaigned to be the next state minister of justice. The Hearts and Minds Party he'd formed focused on the reformation of the current judicial system, the reallocation of spending to community services, and, most controversial of all, the abolishment of heroes. Hanabata lost the election by a staggering amount of votes, unsurprising to most, and his burgeoning party dissolved not long after. You know him? Tsukachi pressed, leaning forward in his seat. Izuku shook his head. He distantly followed Hanabata's political movement through news outlets and agreed with several of his policies, but hadn't been personally involved with either the politician or his party. The other faces he saw before him he didn't recognize, likely members of the party that failed to rise to prominence. He looked up at the two men watching him intently. Are you questioning me because you think I'm affiliated with him? Is supporting a political campaign illegal now? Not exactly. Tsukachi tapped the photo of Hanabata with a calloused finger. After he lost the election, Hanabata disappeared for several months before emerging as part of a suspected terrorist organization known as the Meta Liberation Army. Never heard of them. Tsukachi gave him a searching look. Are you sure? Not even rumors among your followers? Or your fellow band mates, perhaps? Izuku's eyes narrowed in mistrust. I don't like what you're implying, detective. More photos were unearthed. Some of your associates have been linked to known members of this Meta Liberation Army. Izuku glanced at the photos, feeling his stomach drop. They were shots taken from security cameras around the city, some of the streets and others of crimes in progress. The top photo depicted two tall young men hurrying from a building, a box in each of their arms. Their faces were obscured by ball caps and hoodies drawn tight, but Izuku could see the familiar glint of facial piercings poking out from one of the hoods. He recognized the building as well, one he'd seen on the news a few weeks before in his living room with Rhodey. Rhodey. He kept his expression as neutral as possible, giving the hero and detective an unimpressed look. You have grainy pictures of nondescript figures possibly committing a crime. Nothing concrete and certainly nothing to link anyone you captured tonight to a dangerous criminal organization. Then you can provide alibis for all of your associates' whereabouts 2 weeks ago? Eraserhead asked tonelessly. We had a performance, Izuku said easily. Lasted most of the night. Then we ate dinner and all went home. And they were with you that night? Tsukachi pressed. All of them? The whole night? It was just a short gig for Jiren, Izuku remembered Tuya saying. Only a few days they'd be gone. He could feel his throat tightening from panic, the whisper of the air conditioning unit and the low hum of the overhead lights buzzing against his skin. Still, he kept his composure. The whole night. Our music is the most important thing to us. No one would miss a concert unless they had to. Tsukachi frowned, his lips parting and his brow furrowing in confusion. Next to him, Eraserhead had been staring the singer down with glowing eyes, giving a subtle shake of his head at the detective's questioning look. Eventually, Tsukachi let out a weary sigh. I guess that's all then. Izuku wanted to sigh in relief but knew better than to trust either of these men. That's all? I get to go home now. Not quite. Eraserhead was still staring at him, his crimson gaze full of accusation. We need to confirm your alibi with the others we've apprehended. Typical, Izuku thought bitterly as the two men left the room and locked the door behind them. Even with no evidence, they'll still find a way to charge all of us. Despite his confidence in his friends, Izuku couldn't help but wonder just what Tenko and Tuya had gotten themselves into. Jiren had always been a close friend to them and had never involved any of them in something so dangerous. Then again, Izuku had been younger when they'd first met. If Jiren wasn't the man he'd always believed him to be, he shook his head angrily. No, he could trust Jiren, could trust Tuya and Tenko and the rest of their misfit family. The people he couldn't trust were the ones who'd captured him. Hours went by with no further contact, with nothing to do but count ceiling tiles and run imaginary arguments with the smug hero and his detective friend through his mind over and over. Eventually he'd had enough, striding to the locked door and slamming his fist against it. After a moment the lock clicked and a face popped through. A young man in a policeman's uniform. What is it? I need to use the restroom. The man paused for a moment, looking over his shoulder with uncertainty. Can't you hold it? I'm sure Detective Tsukachi will be back soon. Nope. It's either a bathroom or one of these corners. It was an empty threat, but effective as the policeman's face blanched. All right, but don't you dare try to escape. He did his best to look stern, but it came off as comical instead. He led his captive to a restroom past the interrogation rooms and near the waiting area. Once inside, Izuku noted the single window was far too small to stage an escape, only just big enough to fit an arm through. There was nothing he could weaponize within reach, and the vent overhead, while likely big enough to fit him, was well beyond his reach. It wasn't until he was washing his hands did Izuku catch the faint tapping of something sharp against the glass, the sound hitting his ear insistently. Reaching the window, he pushed it open, peering out into the darkness and spotting a plume of colorful feathers. Pino? Pino chirped happily in response, swooping inside and nuzzling his cheek. A moment later, gray eyes emerged from the darkness, Rhodey's usual laid-back smile now wrought with concern. Glad to see they haven't beheaded you. What are you doing here? Izuku asked him, taking in his friend's tangled hair and dark circles. What about Roro and Lala? They're fine, Rhodey promised. The Sawayamas are babysitting still. They said no one stopped by while we were gone. I checked our place too and nothing, so I'm guessing the cops don't know where we live yet. Or the Sawayamas. That was good news, at least. I'm glad they're safe. I'm glad you're safe. Have you run into anyone else? None of our people, just fans who were either released by the cops or never caught. Any idea what the hell happened? Izuku explained what he'd learned as best he could, saving his theories until the very end. It sounds like this new political group has the heroes scared. They're trying to track down anyone who might be associated with them for questioning. Rhodey scoffed. And they think we joined some freedom fighters because of a few songs? Figures. Not just us, they think. They're saying Tuya and Tenko were part of that robbery, that they're the ones allied with the meta whatever. It was hard to wrap his head around. Tenko and Tuya had only ever acted in the best interests of the group and had worked hard to secure Tenko's bar. Getting involved with a dangerous group of people, no matter their beliefs, would jeopardize not only their lives but everyone else they cared about as well. At Rhodey's incredulous look, Izuku clarified. I don't believe them for a second. The heroes have no evidence, and even if they did, I'd bet it was faked. We know Tenko and Tuya. They would never do something like that. Good, Rhodey said, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Look, I can't get inside without attracting a lot of unwanted attention. Maybe you could slip out. Izuku shook his head, Pino letting out an irritated trill at the movement from atop her perch in his nest of curls. Too risky. The hero who grabbed me seems determined to get to the bottom of this. If I run, he'll just capture me again, which would only make things worse. As of yet, they didn't have anything on him, not even illegal quirk usage. Still, there was no telling what they might accuse him of to justify keeping him there indefinitely. Rhodey looked about as happy as Izuku felt. So, what? I'm supposed to just leave you here? Find the others if anybody else managed to escape and call Jiren. He can get us lawyers if we need them. He could also explain to the singer just what exactly he'd been getting his friends into, but that would have to wait for the moment. I don't like this, Zu. Believe me, I'm not thrilled about it either, Izuku grumbled. He reached his hand through the small window, fumbling for roadies in the dark. I'll be okay, knowing the kids are safe and that you've got my back. Rhodey took the hand, gripping it tight. Always. Chapter 4. Sleep when I'm dead. There must be something we can do with him. Shota Aizawa pinched the bridge of his nose, wanting nothing so much as for the conversation and the night itself to end. The other heroes had taken their captures to the stations in their jurisdictions, with only Gran Torino, Night Eye, and Shota himself at Tsukachi Station. It had been fairly easy to question and process most of the people they'd managed to capture, yet their biggest targets posed the biggest issues. Tenko Shimura, Shuichi Iguchi, and Jin Bubaigawara are on their way to Tartarus. The hero Ryukyu informed them through the large screen on the wall. Tuya Todoroki is still being held at our station, waiting for Endeavor's arrival. That sounds like fun, Shota muttered dryly, thankful he'd captured one of the easier targets. Midori is the only member of the group we currently have in custody, Tsukachi told her, reading through the files on his desk. His records have been scrubbed clean, same as with your captures and the other band members. We have nothing on the foreign one that escaped from Lemillion, but we'll continue to dig. Let us know if you find anything on your end. Ryukyu confirmed and ended the call. Tsukachi turned to give Shota a regretful look. We can't hold him. We have no evidence to tie him to the Liberation Army aside from his relationships with the other band members. We didn't manage to capture all of them, Shota argued. If we let him go, we'll have no way to find out where the rest are hiding. If we let him go, he might lead us to them. You two have lost your touch, Gran Torino muttered. Give me 5 minutes with the brat and I'll get the truth out of him. Tsukachi frowned. He wasn't lying to us, I don't think. The older man raised a brow. You mean you don't know? My Quirk didn't detect any lies from him. But, Tsukachi frowned, Shota mirroring the gesture. It had been strange, listening to their conversation, as though he was hearing it underwater. He'd activated his own Quirk to eliminate any foul play, but that didn't stop the buzzing in his ear. He supposed it had been some time since he'd slept. Perhaps he was only imagining it. His phone, asked Gran Torino. He didn't have it when Eraserhead captured him, and I doubt we'll be able to find it at the warehouse. Tsukachi frowned. Let's hope Lemillion and Sun Eater are more careful next time. Them, and all of your cop friends too. We don't even have records of some of these people, Shota grumbled. No birth records, no prior criminal histories. That alone makes the boy suspicious, and with the rhetoric he and his cohort have been spreading, we have more than enough to keep him. Ah, but where shall we keep him? Shota felt his hackles rise as the gentle, lilting voice of UA High School's principal drifted over to him. He turned to see the small white creature standing just outside the office, his suit pristine despite the late hour. Nizu. The very same. Am I a bear, a dog, or a mouse? Who's to say? But more importantly, who is this young man you've captured, Eraser? A punk who's headed to Tartarus, along with the rest of them. Shota was in no mood to entertain the principal's wild ideas. If he's innocent, we'll let him go. If not, do you really think it's fair, throwing someone so young into a maximum security prison? If we let him go, he'll only cause trouble, Gran Torino said firmly. We may not have much on him, but the others are clearly involved. We could move him to a less secure prison, Tsukachi offered, but Shota knew that wasn't an option. Less secure means easier to access, Nizu countered. If the press is able to reach him, and it turns out we're wrong about his involvement, then we lose all credibility in this case, Shota finished, hating himself for agreeing. Maybe all credibility entirely. Hero Society had been in doubt for some time, far longer than this boy and his band of anarchists had been making noise for. Falsely imprisoning someone who already had the ear of the people could prove devastating, but letting him go would likely give them similar results. Precisely. We need to keep him somewhere safe. away from the public eye, but not so drastic as Tartarus. Shota felt his stomach drop. You can't mean. Obviously, we'll have to take him to UA, Nizu said brightly, ignoring the heated look Shota gave him. Our campus is quite secure after all, and he's the same age as our third-year students. Perhaps he'll come to understand heroes better if he can learn about them amongst his peers. No, Shota's voice was flat and toneless, but the frustration was evident in his posture. It was far too risky to tie Yue's reputation to such a figure, even if he was innocent. Even more concerning, he doubted the rebellious, anti-establishment radical would find any kinship or harmony among the students of UA. That would be a tough sell, to both the commission and the school board, Tsukachi replied carefully. Leave them to me. I can be ever so persuasive when necessary. He'd also need someone guarding him, Tsukachi continued, to make sure he doesn't escape before we finish the investigation. 3 sets of eyes found the underground hero. Absolutely not. Oh, come now, Eraser. Who better to care for him than the one who managed to capture him? Drop dead, you nosy little rodent. Gran Torino let out a laugh that was rusty with age. Ha! I like it. I'd offer you Toshinori if he wasn't in the States, but this is just as good. Have fun babysitting, Eraser. Shota crossed his arms, his temples beginning to throb. You can't make me. The words came out more petulant than resolute, judging by Gran Torino's continued snickering. I have hero work. I have classes to teach. And what better way for this boy to gain a fresh perspective than by sitting in on the hero courses? We just might be able to change his mind about us. Shota very much doubted it. Asterisk 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 asterisk. By the time Eraserhead and Detective Tsukachi had returned to the interrogation room, Izuku had been on the precipice of sleep. His eyes stinging and his body heavy. The sweat from the concert, his attempt to evade capture, and the night's sticky humidity had dried in the chill of the police station, leaving him feeling cold and grimy. He was hungry and, though the officer who'd escorted him to the restroom and back had provided him a small bottle of water, his mouth was going dry from thirst. He was terribly uncomfortable, but he tried not to let it show as the 2 men took their seats opposite him, their eyes wary and their shoulders tense. Well? They looked to each other, neither one wanting to answer first. Izuku let out a weary sigh. You're not letting me go. It wasn't a question. No, we're not, came Eraserhead's even reply. I'll be taking you to a secure facility until our investigation is complete. If we truly have nothing as you claim, you'll be released with our deepest apologies. And how shallow those deep apologies would be, Izuku had no doubt. The words would grate at his ears like the sound of cracking glass. Where are you taking me? There was another pause, followed by a reluctant, UA High. The room fell silent, save for the whoosh of air conditioning and the buzz of the overhead lights. Izuku barked out a laugh, jagged and bitter. Very funny. When nothing further came from either of them, Izuku began to worry. You can't be serious. A high school, really? You're the same age as my 3rd years, Eraserhead answered, his face pinched. You'd blend in well enough and won't be able to cause any trouble while we sort out this mess with your accomplices. My friends haven't done anything, Izuku spat, his temper beginning to flare. And neither have I. I might be the same age as your child soldiers, but I've already tested out of high school. Thank you very much. We have no record of that, Tsukachi intervened. We don't have any records of you, not even a birth certificate. If it weren't for Officer Shimizu's profiling Quirk, we wouldn't even know your name, your age, your blood type, anything. He leaned forward, his eyes bright. We don't even know what you can do, Quirk-wise, and that should have been the first thing to come up when we searched your name. You're a mystery, and that's just as dangerous as a known villain these days. We can't run the risk of you interfering with this investigation. There's simply too much at stake. So you're locking me away in some nursery for callow, brainwashed bioweapons? Izuku ground out, his teeth clenched painfully. He couldn't believe their gall, infantilizing him in such a way. He was young, yes, but an active member of his community and nearly an adult besides. He even paid taxes, or his band did, on the little revenue he earned. To treat him like a child was to undermine everything he'd done in recent years to effect change. It would strip him of his dignity and the respect he'd worked so hard to earn among the people of the city. We're placing you in a school as opposed to a cramped prison with hardened criminals, Eraserhead countered, the man's own irritation clear on his face. You should be grateful. Grateful? Enough, Tsukachi snapped, slamming his fist on the table in what Izuku guessed was meant to be intimidation. That's enough. Like it or not, this is the best-case scenario for you, Deku. You don't have any choice in the matter either, so please make this easy for us and go willingly. And if I don't? Eraserhead's answering smile was wicked and unsettling. Then we make a big public spectacle of dragging you there, and your hard-won reputation as a rebel goes up in smoke. And without that, who's really going to listen to you whine about your life? He wanted to fire back with a haughty declaration that anything they did to him would only embolden his fans. But he knew deep down that wasn't the truth. He thought back to those uncertain faces he saw at every performance, the ones whose opinions swayed like leaves in the wind. He'd need all of Shuichi's PR skills to get them back on track once this nightmare was over, and he didn't think adding an accusation of terrorism would bring any new converts to his cause. Izuku had to concede the hero knew just where to hit him. He held his anger at bay but couldn't help the sneer that twisted his mouth. Fine. Fine. Asterisk 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 asterisk. They didn't speak the entire ride to UA, Midoriya's quiet fury palpable in the back seat. Tsukachi seemed perturbed by the force of it, but Shota couldn't care less, his head resting against the cool glass of the window as he tried to catch a few blissful moments of sleep. The night sky was never truly dark in the city, with its illuminated buildings and colossal advertisements flashing brightly on screens above. But Shota found he could sleep just about anywhere, with enough determination. He dozed lightly on their journey, certain that Midoriya wouldn't try to hurt either him or Tsukachi, but prepared to subdue him all the same. The outskirts of the city had been quiet, save for the sounds of the concert and the eventual screams and fighting after its interruption. But the more populated parts of the city thrummed with life, bar-goers and club patrons filling the streets with excited chatter and pounding footsteps. Cars honked and music poured from open doors and windows, voices joining and leaving the chorus of the night. It was a beautiful thing, but it was disturbing Shota's sleep, a grave offense in his estimation. When they finally reached UA and glided through the gates to the dormitories, Midoriya exited the car silently. His arms crossed petulantly as he awaited direction. Shota thanked Tsukachi for the ride and extracted a promise of information as soon as the detective had it. When he turned to guide Midoriya, he paused, unsure for a moment as to where to put him. If he were a real hero student, he'd be placed in the 3A dorms with the rest of Shota's class, but that was entirely too risky. The students hadn't been introduced to him yet, wouldn't know what to look out for if Midoriya tried to flee. The rest of the faculty was likely fast asleep and, though it was the most preferable option, Nizu was not in his own suite atop the faculty apartments. Who knew what dangerous things were stored in the principal's abode? Things Midoriya could use if the boy was clever enough to figure them out. It certainly wasn't a risk Shota was willing to take. With a groan, he realized where Nizu wanted him to house Midoriya, vowing silently to get his revenge somehow. This way, kid. Shota's apartment resided on the 3rd floor of the faculty building. Not high enough for a lethal fall, but enough for an unpleasant one. The space held a decently sized living room, a small dining area beside a cramped kitchen, a bathroom at the end of a narrow hallway, and 2 rooms barely larger than the ones given to the students. Shota's secondary room was meant to be an office, though he'd never used it as such. There was a couch across from the small desk that Midoriya could sleep on, at least until Shota found another place to dump him, and a window that overlooked the rest of the campus. When he opened the door to the study, he was irritated but largely unsurprised to see Nizu had someone refurnish it. His lumpy couch now gone and replaced with a narrow twin bed. He grit his teeth. You'll stay in here for now until we decide where to put you. Don't break anything. Midoriya cocked a brow. Am I going to wear my stage clothes the entire time I'm stuck here? He was wearing a black shirt that hugged him and baggy black pants, visible white stitching running up and down the seams of the fabric. His scuffed red shoes had bits of gravel and something else filthy clinging to them, and his belt, bracelets and choker were all leather and metal, the very picture of a wannabe rock star. Shota moved to the spare closet, finding no new clothing to offer his captive. He bit back a curse. Wait here. Digging through the linen closet, he found a ratty t-shirt and an old pair of sweatpants from his time as a hero student. Frayed and outdated but clean nonetheless. Midoriya was short but would fit the clothes well enough. And Shota once again reminded himself that the situation was temporary. He realized then it was entirely too quiet, even with Midoriya's petulant behavior, and that the window in the study also overlooked a large tree with sturdy enough branches. Shit! Midoriya had made it through the window and halfway to the gates by the time Shota caught up to him. His capture scarf unwound and ready to strike. He missed the first shot, Midoriya dodging the attack and sprinting faster than he should have been able to after such a long night. Damn kids and their energy, Shota grumbled. He chased him all the way to the gates, Midoriya frantically entering the code he'd no doubt watched Tsukachi punch in to deactivate the defense mechanisms and grant them access to the campus. They'd need to have that changed. The capture scarf finally hit its mark, winding around its target and forcing him to the ground. The end wrapped around Midoriya's mouth, muffling the string of curses he'd released. Green eyes glared up at him balefully, though the effect was lessened by his pitiful state in the dirt. Shota glared back before his face sagged in exhaustion. It was going to be a very long night. Chapter 5, Gloom Boys. The armored truck bound for Tartarus rattled and shook as it thundered down the empty streets, its passengers rattling along with it. Tenko Shimura sat wedged between Shuichi and Jin, both gravely silent yet thrumming with anxiety. Tenko had suspected something strange was happening the second he'd heard the screaming. Not the angry or jubilant screams normally heard at their concerts, but fearful, deafening screams that turned his blood to ice. He'd needed only a moment to lock eyes with Tuya to know they were trapped, yet they fought with all their strength to help the others escape. He hadn't seen what had become of Atsuhiro, who had found a side street to escape through, but Magna had ran until she was but a speck on the horizon, her shape melting into the dark. He was grateful for that, as he doubted the heroes or law enforcement would have the decency to ensure Magna be sent to a woman's prison ward as she ought to be. Processing took what felt like an eternity, Tenko's skin, hair, saliva and blood taken for the prison's records. The guards asked him questions, jotting down notes and glowering as though he'd personally offended them. They asked about his quirk, which he refused to comment on, then brought in a specialist to find the truth. Glowing eyes looked through him to his very core, but the man had only shaken his head, muttering, "Inconclusive. That was fine with Tenko." He didn't want to share his quirk with them any more than he wanted to house it inside of himself. He was fitted with a quirk-suppressing collar, a heavy metal contraption that wrapped around his neck like a serpent. He'd seen technology like this before, only much more refined and not nearly as bulky. He scoffed, unsurprised by the shoddy work. It was thinner in the back, likely so that he could lie down with less difficulty, though the feeling of it would take some getting used to. He hoped he wouldn't be there long enough for that. The cell the guards had shoved him into was small but clean, walls of thick concrete encircling him and completed by a door of metal and energy, the lock hissing as it clicked into place with a grim finality. He sat on the edge of his skeletal bed, more iron than cloth, and let his mind wander. Jin, Shuichi, likely Tuya. Who else had been captured? Not Himiko, that was obvious, her quirk blessing her with an easy escape. Magna he watched disappear, hopefully safe and strong enough to find and protect the others in his absence. Atsuhiro likely escaped as well, given his upbringing, leaving only Izuku and Rodi to worry for. Rodi would be fine so long as Izuku wasn't in peril. His tenacity and street smarts more than enough to guide him. But Izuku, of everyone he was the most likely to be caught, all too willing to risk his own safety for the people he loved. He could almost see him, eyes frightened but determined, throwing himself in the line of fire to save any one of them. He could hear his voice, trembling but powerful nonetheless, swaying those around him, forcing them to listen. Then a hero would step him, hurt him, accuse him of a villainy he could never hope to possess, and then everything they'd worked so hard to achieve would end. Tenko prayed he was wrong about that. Guards were pacing the halls, sometimes alone, sometimes in pairs. He could hear two of them approaching, speaking to one another in hushed voices. Tenko crept closer to the door of his cell, mindful to keep out of view of the reinforced window as he placed his ear against the metal. "Heard one of them is Endeavor's kid," said one guard, his voice low but loud enough to be heard. "Sounds like he's involved in some serious stuff." The second guard huffed out a short, mirthless laugh. "How much you want to bet he gets out with only a slap on the wrist?" "He can't. That's what's so crazy. The commission's not gonna let this one go, or it'll be PR nightmare. Endeavor's so screwed if this gets out. The commission too, probably." "Where did you hear this?" "Nakamura's sister works for Ryukyu's agency. They're keeping the guy there until Endeavor can squeeze some information out of him. Then he's heading to us." Tenko felt his chest constrict tightly, his heart thudding painfully against his ribs. No, anyone but him. Flashes of orange and blue flooded his vision, the smell of smoke and the roar of hateful fires transporting him far away from the dark, cramped cell and into a blazing inferno. His fist found metal, the smooth material turning rough under his touch despite his collar. He'd saved Tuya from that hell once before. He couldn't let him be claimed by it again. Asterisk 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 asterisk. The morning after Izuku's detainment was hard, the night having passed him by with little to no sleep. After his disastrous escape attempt, Eraserhead had stayed up all night watching him, his eyes glowing and his expression hard. Once dawn had broke, the hero called someone, muttering angrily into the phone and summoning a man made of concrete not 10 minutes later. He took one look at Izuku, then at Eraserhead, then began to laugh. "This is who gave you all that trouble? A kid dressed like a punk." "He is a punk," Eraserhead growled, "and a pain in the ass too." Izuku made an offensive gesture, taking pride in the affronted sound the stony man made. He set to work creating an intricate latticework on each of the windows, thin enough to allow light through but too strong to be broken with brute strength alone. Eraserhead thanked him before locking Izuku in the spare room, the sounds of running water following soon after. When he was done, he led Izuku to the bathroom and all but shoved him in, slamming the door shut and presumably standing just outside of it. Izuku didn't care. What did it matter if his sour-faced captor hated him? Izuku held no love for heroes, particularly ones that terrorized his fans and fellow bandmates and held them without cause. He fumed throughout his shower, composing angry arguments in his head that he kept losing, as none of them magicked him back to his friends, back to Rody and Roro and Lala. When he was finished, he found a dry towel to use, then turned to study himself in the foggy mirror. The stage makeup he'd been wearing had run and smeared and flaked off throughout the night, the last of it washed away with the unscented soap the hero kept in his shower caddy. The piercings in his nose and eyebrow had been fake and lost in his frantic dash through the city, but the silver hanging from ears remained in place. He had no tattoos despite Tuya promising to take him to get some, in his hair, once gelled and styled to perfection by Atsuhiro, now hung like seaweed from the crown of his head. Scouring the drawers, he found a brush and an unopened pot of styling cream, likely an unwanted gift to his captor from some well-meaning associate. He was skilled enough to tame and shape his curls into something presentable, though they lacked Atsuhiro's practiced flair. He found a stack of folded clothes near the door to the toilet room, placed on an old hamper. He noted with some disdain that it was a school uniform, likely the one UA students wore. Pulling it on, he realized the pants were far too big for him and the tie, something Izuku had never worn in his life, was far too long. "Great," he muttered, wrestling with the garments. "Now I'll look as stupid as I feel." Returning to the mirror, Izuku could have screamed at what he saw. A boy with wide eyes and chubby cheeks wearing conformity and submission, topped with messy hair and a mangled tie. He was ready to give up and face his captor when something at the back of a drawer caught his eye. It was a small, ornate bottle that opened to release a long wand of pitch-black paste. Kajal. He thought back to the hero's glowing red eyes. His power must cause him irritation. A cursory inspection of the waste bin revealed an empty bottle of eye drops, prescription strength, that confirmed his suspicions. He pocketed the Kajal, tucking it and the information away for the moment. When he'd exited the bathroom, he found the hallway empty, the scent of coffee wafting from the kitchen. Izuku moved without thinking, finding Eraserhead bent over a steaming cup with a look of what was almost fondness on his face. It disappeared as soon as he caught sight of Izuku, his eyebrow cocked. "Wear a lot of ties, I take it?" His cheeks flushed. There's not a huge demand for them in the underground scene. He expected another venomous barb, but instead the hero merely shrugged. "Was never a huge fan of them myself. Wear it or don't, I don't really care." That was all the permission Izuku needed, pulling the offensive thing off and tossing it back down the hallway. He crossed into the kitchen, faltering for a moment. Do you have food?" "Nope," Eraserhead replied, lifting his mug. "This usually does the trick for me." It was disheartening to hear after not eating since the day prior, but Izuku had gone hungry before. He found a mug and filled it with coffee, surprised again at the man's lenience. He expected more snapping and shoving. Perhaps the coffee was making him docile, or perhaps exhaustion had finally broken him. There was no sugar or cream to be found either, so Izuku drank his coffee with a grimace instead, ignoring the smug look on Eraserhead's face. Tuya was a coffee purist too. Tuya. Eraserhead did have jelly pouches in abundance. A concerning meal choice for a grown man, but Izuku took the one thrown to him without comment. As soon as they'd stepped beyond the apartment, the moment of peace ended, Eraserhead moving him brusquely through the halls with a sour look on his face. "Rules. Number 1. Don't tell any of the students why you're really here." Izuku glared at him. "And how do you plan on stopping me?" The hero's answering smile was nasty. "I won't, but I'll make sure the press hears the story I want them to. The one where you and your delinquent friends robbed an important hero research facility and plan on handing those secrets to enemies of the state." Izuku's eyes widened, not from Eraserhead's ridiculous threat, but from the information he'd accidentally let slip. The robbery they'd wanted him to confess to was of a research facility? What could have been stolen that made the heroes fear an attack? His thoughts drifted to the cajole he'd swiped from the bathroom, the first clue to his captor's strengths and weaknesses. He might be able to get the whole picture from the man, if he was careful. Eraserhead must have taken his silence for assent, as he continued his list. Number 2. Keep your propaganda to yourself. "I will if you do," Izuku muttered petulantly. "Lastly, you'll do as the faculty tells you. If you're asked a question, you answer. If you're given an assignment, you do it. Pretend to be a normal student and we'll treat you like one. And nobody has to know you're a suspect in a criminal investigation." It all seemed horribly unfair to Izuku, who hadn't done any of the things he and his friends were being accused of, but he knew better than to push the hero too far. Escaping was one thing, but revealing too much of himself here, of his past. "I want to go by Deku," he announced suddenly, surprising himself as much as Eraserhead. No one here needs to know my name, right? If you're forcing me to perform as some brainwashed hero student, I should at least get to use my stage name." Eraserhead looked at him as though he'd just said something profoundly stupid. Still Izuku held his ground, eyes fixed determinedly on the colossal, H-shaped building in front of him. The hero was quiet for a moment longer, then said, "What do I care? Call yourself whatever you want." And for the moment, that would be enough. Chapter 6. Heaven Knows. Dekus rocket to number 1 in alternative charts. Achiko Uraraka smiled to herself as she skimmed the article, her eyes darting to the classroom door to check for Mr. Aizawa. In the 3 years he'd been the homeroom teacher for her class, he'd never once deviated from his schedule, not even after a night of patrolling the city. She continued her reading, hoping to find dates listed for the band's next big performance. Next to her, Kyoka peered over her shoulder. "Stalking that band again?" Achiko nodded absently. "They're number 1 on the alt charts now." Kyoka let out a low whistle. "Ticket prices are gonna skyrocket, I bet." "No way. They're big on supporting the little guy. They wouldn't raise the prices on their fans just because they're getting popular." From his seat, Ida turned to frown at them. "Are you two gossiping about that radical band again?" "They're not radical, Ida, they just have a different view on heroes, that's all." Ida's frown deepened, but he said nothing further, turning back to face the front. Achiko glanced at the clock 2 minutes before class. The article held no information on a possible tour schedule, disappointing but not surprising. The Deaconess seemed to prefer spontaneous performances in obscure venues around the city, which made for a great adventure finding the concerts but difficult for a hero student with a strict curfew to attend. Even her summer break had been too hectic and too short to find the time between training, studying for the next semester, and participating in her work study. Her life would be even busier after graduation, which only gave her so much time to attend any kind of concert. Still, she was determined to see the Deaconess perform live at least once. The door swung open at the exact moment the bell chimed. Class 3, as homeroom teacher sauntering in with his usual lack of enthusiasm. Despite the normalcy of this, several things were off. For one, Izawa was without his yellow sleeping bag, a part of his attire as integral as his capture scarf. This might have contributed to the irritation on his face, though Achiko could see some genuine anger mixed in as well. Finally, and most obviously different, a boy around their age came sauntering in behind him. Achiko caught a flash of curly hair and the sleeve of their school uniform as Izawa turned to growl something at him, but little else as the two bickered quietly, eventually reaching some sort of agreement. Izawa turned to face his class. "We have a transfer student temporarily joining our class. Principal's idea, not mine. I'm sure you'll all give him a warm welcome." His tone was dry, but Achiko could tell he meant it, his expression all but ordering them to be on their best behavior. No doubt he had been growling the same thing to the new student. He stepped out of the way to allow the new student to introduce himself, shuffling to his podium at the head of the class without further comment. After a moment, the student stepped forward. He didn't look particularly tall and had a wiry build, though the ill-fitting uniform could have been part of the issue. His hair was a deep green that matched the color of his eyes, and freckles dotted his full cheeks. He gave them a smile that was clearly just for show. "It's nice to meet you. My name is Deku," Achiko exclaimed, jumping from her seat. It had taken a moment to place him without all of his piercings and out of his punk attire, but there was no mistaking that voice. She realized everyone had turned to look at her, Deku included, and she sunk back into her chair, her cheeks bright red. Deku's smile became charming. "You must be a fan, then?" Towards the front, Mina let out a whoop. "Our Chaco's a total metalhead. Anything that rocks is definitely her style." Achiko felt as though she might die of embarrassment, several of her classmates snickering at her. Sorry about that. But yeah, I love your music." "What are you doing here?" asked Kyoka, her gaze assessing as she took in the singer. "Are you a hero student as well?" "For the time being, I transferred to UA from Aldra High, General Studies. Your school principal offered me a semester in the hero program to better understand what it is you do." The cadence of his voice had shifted. It was subtle enough that the others might not have noticed, but Achiko certainly had. A quick glance to Kyoka confirmed her super hearing had detected it as well. Now Ida was rising from his seat. "I understand you have a poor opinion of heroes based on your artistic choices, correct? If you mean to suggest that I take umbrage with the government allocating a staggering number of resources to a militant sect of its body while simultaneously using them to control the market with merchandising, advertisements, and technological weapon advancements, none of which ever benefit the working class, then yes." The words were sharp enough to send Ida back to his chair, utterly shocked by the rebuttal. Izawa cleared his throat in warning and gave the new student a look. Deku ignored it and continued. "I hope my time with you disproves my pessimistic views of heroes, but I want to be clear that my issue is with the institution itself, not a specific individual. I'm sure the students and faculty here will have something to teach me, and I hope you'll learn from my point of view as well." As he finished, he looked to Izawa, who jerked his head to one of the class' many empty seats. By the time they'd reached their third year, Class A had shrunk to 12 students, which their teacher had informed them was a relatively high number for the hero program. The coursework, exams, and hero requirements had only grown stricter as they advanced from first years to second, then finally to third, and the competition for agency sponsorships had been intense from day one of classes. Achiko missed some of her classmates now relegated to general studies. Others she rarely thought of. She had been half hoping Deku would choose a seat by her, but instead he grabbed one towards the back. If Izawa had any opinions on their latest edition, he kept them from showing, his face carefully blank. He turned to the chalkboard. "Let's begin." Asterisk 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 asterisk. By lunchtime rumors had already begun forming about Class 3, as new student, most of which centered around the peculiarity of such a sought-after course allowing a non-hero transfer student to join them. The relatively underground nature of the Deaconess meant most students had no idea of the new kid's celebrity status, making him all the more intriguing to those that did. Achiko wasted no time inviting him to eat with herself, Sue and Ida, introducing him to the array of meal options provided by Lunch Rush. As they chose their food, she allowed herself some time to really look at him. He was taller than she but only by a few inches, skinny but with a hint of muscle tone that indicated routine exercise. His nails were painted but chipped and his eyes were lightly lined with black. Silver glinted in his ears, and there was a flash of something dark around his throat, peeking out from under his collar. Information on the singer and his bandmates had always been slim, the mystery of them being part of their charm. None of their ages had ever been confirmed, but she'd guessed the younger members of the band had to be at least close to her own age. It made her wonder if the bassist and drummer attended the same high school Deku claimed to be from. They found their seats with the rest of the group, Achiko taking the seat opposite Deku and beside Ida. Sue sat beside their newest lunchmate, their green hair only a shade or two off from a perfect match. Lunch Rush's food was incredible as always, but Achiko found she could barely taste it in her excitement. So, tell us about yourself, or the Deaconess, or both if you don't mind. We want to know everything. Ida made a face that meant he very much didn't want to know everything but kept quiet, his eyes fixed on his plate. Deku paid him no mind. I'm afraid we're not as exciting as the media makes us out to be. We perform and participate in activism. Sure, but beyond that we all lead pretty normal lives. Our drummer Himiko volunteers at a blood bank and guitarist Magna writes for a local paper. What about the other guy, Ribbit? Asked Sue between bites of her fish. What about you? Oh, Rhodey's studying to become a pilot, and I'm focused mainly on the music. Don't get me wrong, the others are just as important to the creative process. But when it comes to the songwriting, well, there was the barest hint of a smile on his face, his eyes far away as he talked. He was proud of his work, that was obvious, but he didn't seem overly conceited about it. It was clear the band was the most important thing to him, which made it that much stranger that he'd want to attend UA, a school notorious for bogarting its students' time. So why come to UA, then? Came a voice from behind her. Achiko turned to see Kyoka and Yamamo watching them, each carrying a tray. The two often ate lunch apart from the others, treating the brief reprieve they had from training and classes as dates they could squeeze in during mealtimes. Occasionally they joined the others if asked, but only their curiosity could have drawn them to the group this time. They sat down at the neighboring table, eyes fixed on Deku. His smile was still there but had become less open than it had been a moment before, his expression pleasant but wary. Finishing school, unfortunately, has to take priority. I'd love nothing more than to dedicate every waking moment to my craft, but the others convinced me to do my best academically, maybe even pursue a college education to better my understanding of the world and to reinforce my views of it. Views that are inherently pessimistic, Momo commented mildly. Do your associates not value their own education as much as yours? Why haven't they transferred? Dika's smile turned sharp. They would love nothing more than to attend one of the country's most prestigious schools. Unfortunately, I was the only one of my band mates still attending school to qualify for a scholarship. That made Achiko freeze, her eyes widening slightly. There was only one other scholarship student still in the hero programs apart from herself, and she knew from experience just how hard it was to obtain one. She'd assumed that the singer was from a wealthy background, that his attending an elite school was an afterthought pushed by nagging parents. To know that Deku got into the program through hard work and dedication to his studies, something Achiko herself had done and maintained for the last 2 years, made her feel closer to him. She had to brush the thought aside. She'd only just met him, and it was clear he didn't like heroes of any kind. She couldn't assume they were friends now just because he'd been nice to her. I'm sure you're unfamiliar with the scholarship program and its incredibly low acceptance rate, he continued coolly. Given the Yaoyorozu family holds dominion over the country's commercial real estate, I imagine the cost of tuition never crossed your mind. Achiko could see the flicker of indignant anger and shame on Momo's face before it smoothed back to an indifferent mask. My family's wealth is no concern of yours. Isn't it? There's more wealth on this campus than there is in 90% of this city alone. Most schools can't afford a hero program, and the few that can still don't have anywhere near the resources this one does. Ida looked up from his plate with a frown. I thought you didn't like heroes. I don't, but disparity is still disparity, no matter who it's happening to. If there's such inequity in funding heroes, then it stands to reason the funding for the other educational programs is just as bad, if not worse. What makes you think our school is treated any better than the others? Deku gave Momo an incredulous look. You have professional heroes teaching your classes, guarding your beds at night, making you lunch. You're being waited on hand and foot by people our government tells us to worship. That doesn't sound like a privilege to you. Achiko could see Momo becoming uncomfortable with the topic and, taking pity on her, changed it. Okay, so you came on a scholarship for your last year of school. Does that mean there won't be any Deku performances until graduation? It's definitely going to be a long time before we get to perform together again. Kyoka eyed him for a moment, weighing her next words carefully. You know, our class has a band. He turned to look at her, a genuine interest sparkling in his eyes. Oh really? What genre? Mostly a mix of pop and rock with some punk and techno influences as well. I'm a musician too, have been since I was a kid. Then you've got me beat. I only just started a few years ago. She shrugged. My parents are musicians, so it was hard not to take part. It helps that my quirk augments my hearing, so it's easier to hear my mistakes and fix them. The two fell into a deep conversation about music, and the mood at the table lightened significantly. Ida was still frowning and Momo looked as though she'd stepped in something foul, but there were no further arguments for the duration of the meal. As they cleared their trays, Achiko noticed most of the cafeteria was watching them, clusters of students pointing and whispering to one another. She paid the general student body no mind. Rumors were always circulating about the hero students, but she spotted some of her own classmates eyeing them as well. Shoji, Todoroki, and Shinso were at the farthest table in the corner of the cafeteria and, as she'd expected, were not the least bit interested in them. Kirishima and Mina were pretending not to stare but doing a poor job, and Kaminari was openly frowning. It surprised her, seeing the normally upbeat and mischievous blonde appear so sullen. The last at their table, the one most obviously irritated with this new development, was Class A's hothead Bakugo. He was always irritated, of course, but he seemed especially unhappy with Deku, who had yet to notice any of the looks directed at him. That, or he was well trained in brushing off unwanted attention. In any case, Achiko could see that Class 3, as new hero student would be. Chapter 7 Poser. The afternoon brought no reprieve for Izuku even after classes had ended. As Eraserhead informed him, he was to attend the hero training for the day under Principal Nizu's instruction. As an observer only, the hero had stressed, his own displeasure matching Izuku's. Don't talk and don't try to interfere with training, or we'll make you the practice dummy. He'd only rolled his eyes in response. He'd been given a plain blue tracksuit with UA's logo printed on the jacket to change into, leaving his ill-fitting uniform in a rumpled pile on the floor of the bathroom stall and adjusting his piercings, wristbands and choker before checking his appearance. Remembering the cajole he'd swiped, Izuku returned to his discarded pants and retrieved the small bottle, reapplying the paste onto his waterline. He was far from the underground punk who serenaded the common man in the dead of night, but with it on he felt a bit more like himself, at least. Crossing the green to where Eraserhead indicated the training grounds were, Izuku kept his attention on the students and heroes he saw. Most were going about their day or stopping to chat with one another happily, but the singer noticed a few of the heroes moving along the perimeter of the campus, doing their best to look casual. He winced. Watching the heroes patrolling felt like yet another wall closing in on him, like being in a pen full of livestock. The training grounds were at the edge of campus, likely to avoid any collateral damage to the main structures. He'd come to learn there were several training areas, each categorized by a Greek letter, demarcating the grounds and providing the students with different terrains to practice in. Eraserhead chose Ground Beta for this day of training, the area modeled after an urban city, replete with paved streets and towering buildings. It was here where he found the rest of Class 3A. They were dressed in costume, each student proudly displaying their garish ensembles like colorful birds in full plumage. From an aesthetic perspective, Izuku could concede they looked good. No doubt Atsuhiro would be over the moon to see such detailed work. Yet what those costumes represented to the world made the singer's stomach churn. Deku! Uraraka rushed forward, dragging an unhappy Ida and a curious Azui with her. I'm glad Mr. Aizawa is letting you join us, even if you only get to watch. But don't worry, these training sessions are usually pretty exciting. It's almost like being out on the job. Izuku wouldn't necessarily call any of the people he'd spoken to that day friends, though he supposed that Uraraka, Azui, and Jairu had been rather friendly despite knowing his stance on heroics. The brown-haired girl was bubbly and a bit too eager to make friends with him, but Izuku wasn't entirely put off by it. She was clearly a fan of his music, and an even bigger fan of his drummer so far as he could tell, and she seemed to maintain that excitable nature no matter who she was talking to. Izuku wasn't used to people with such a positive outlook, and he couldn't help but wonder if it was a genuine positivity or one born of ignorance. He gave her a guarded smile, all too aware of the rest of her class listening in. I'm sure it will be interesting to watch. Ida gave him a curt nod. We hope to show you our dedication to being great heroes and upstanding members of society, despite what you may think of us. And after classes, I assume we'll be helping you move into the 3A dorms until you complete your studies with us. He shook his head. I have separate accommodations on campus, for the time being. He had no idea when he'd be released or find the right moment to escape, but it didn't look as though he'd be getting away from Eraserhead anytime soon. TCH, of course, the wannabe celebrity requested special treatment. Izuku's gaze sharpened as he watched Bakugo, one of the nastier 3A students, stomp over to the group. He hadn't spoken to the blonde at all in any of their shared classes but had, by virtue of proximity, heard him growl answers to his teacher's questions, scream insults and obscenities to his classmates, and, just before lunch, gloat about his latest training score to someone from another class. From all of this, Izuku had gathered that Bakugo was an unpleasant person, and his comment only cemented that opinion. I've never claimed to be a celebrity, and I don't want any special treatment. I'm just here to learn. Then learn your place, Bakugo sneered. Behind him stood two other boys, Kirishima and Kaminari if Izuku remembered correctly, each sporting identical frowns. The hero courses are for future heroes, not lame asses like you. You don't want to learn from us, you just want more ammo to use against heroes for your next shitty album. Izuku gave him a smile, the expression dripping with insincere sweetness. So you listen to my music? Well, it's always nice to meet a fan, even ones as charming as you. And I'd say I'm learning a lot in the hero courses already. For starters, I'm learning that you're an asshole. The silence stretched out between them and Izuku savored it, enjoying the look of shock and outrage dancing across the other boy's face. The other students were equally shocked, their eyes darting to Bakugo as they waited for the eruption. Came shortly after. Just who the hell do you think you are? Fuckface? Bakugo screamed, the veins in his neck straining against skin. He was in front of Izuku in an instant, grabbing a fistful of his collar and dragging him forward. He was only taller than Izuku by a few inches, but his consistent training made him broader and more imposing than the singer, whose workouts consisted primarily of morning jogs and stage rehearsal. Still, Izuku was more annoyed than intimidated, wrinkling his nose in distaste at their sudden closeness. I can tell you who I'm not. I'm not a pompous, self-absorbed prep school brat with a silver spoon on either side of his mouth. I'm not a violent loudmouth who derives power from intimidation, and I'm not hero student who acts like a villain. Who am I? I'm someone trying to make things better for my countrymen. While you're doing everything you can to oppress them, you're the worst parts of heroics combined, a hideous amalgamation of tyranny. Let go of me, and don't ever talk to me again. He'd been calm and collected through his tirade, but Izuku could feel his own anger rising to match his assailant. He'd never been particularly quick to anger, but once his blood heated there was little anyone could do to cool it. Rody and Tenko handled him best in moods like this, and knowing that they weren't there to help, that he was going through this terrible ordeal all alone, only made him angrier. Baku bro, just leave him, yeah? Kirishima said carefully, placing a tentative hand on the blonde's shoulder. It's not worth the fight, man. He shot Izuku an apologetic look, which was balanced by Kaminari's sour one. Yeah, dude, just forget about him. Mr. Aizawa will expel him soon enough and he'll be out of our lives for good. Expel? Izuku looked to Kaminari, ignoring the grimace he got in return. Was it possible that he could escape this place simply by acting out? It seemed unlikely, and if Nizu was as vindictive as Izuku expected, he had no doubt his next cell would be in Tartarus, rather than being released back home. Still, if he could force their hand, make them choose to throw him in the high-security prison and bolster sympathy for himself and his cause. Bakugo let out a grunt before releasing his hold on Izuku, red eyes rolling in his head. Whatever. Fuck you and your shitty attitude. Believe me, the feeling's mutual, Izuku fired back, adjusting his shirt and reflexively feeling for his choker, still fit snugly at his throat. Bakugo gave him one final look of contempt before stomping off to enter the training grounds, his two friends trailing behind him in retreat. With the crisis averted, most of 3A left as well, with only Uraraka, Ida and Azui still clustered around Izuku. Uraraka stepped forward. Sorry about him. He's calmed down a lot the last few years, but he still has a temper. That was calm. Ida made a noise that sounded suspiciously like a laugh, though he did his best to conceal it. Ah, well, if you'd seen him in our first year, you'd agree this is a great improvement. Don't let it bother you, Deku. Ribbit. Eventually he'll get used to you. An explosion sounded in the distance, the force of it vibrating against Izuku's skin. Uraraka gave him a weak smile. Well, maybe don't hold your breath. Asterisk 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 asterisk. The artificial cityscape that UA had created was as impressive as it was unsettling. The city Izuku knew was vibrant and lively, full of the sounds of cars and trains and music and people. This city was dead, silent save for the wind singing low, haunting songs to the students. Eraserhead had his students working in teams in a race to complete several rescue missions, wherein the teams would brave different obstacles and retrieve as many survivors as possible before their time ended. 2 areas near the entrance had been marked off as safety zones for the teams to place their dummies once rescued, which would be tallied upon completing the trial. It was a simple, inelegant system, but one that would work well enough for their needs. Izuku found it rather pointless, as no true emergency would be so lifeless and static, but kept his opinions to himself as the first pair of teams entered. Uraraka, Yaoyorozu, and Kirishima were paired against Bakugo, Jiru, and Azui, the 2 teams entering the grounds at the start of the trial. They diverged at an intersection of the main road, Uraraka's team turning right, Bakugo's turning left. The viewing area held several large screens showing the different areas where the dummies resided, waiting to be rescued. The screens also showed major streets in the fake city that captured the hero students' movements from time to time, before they'd disappear down an alley or side street out of view. Ida had stood by Izuku for a few uncomfortable minutes before excusing himself, awkwardly moving away from him and over to Ishido and Kaminari, his teammates for the next match. Izuku didn't mind, enjoying the reprieve from socializing. It wasn't until they were almost upon him that Izuku noticed Shinso, Shoji, and Todoroki moving to join him, their faces expressionless. His heart leapt into his throat at the sight. He'd known, of course, that the elite school would be full of kids from privileged backgrounds, but he had no idea just how much political and social power was housed in Class 3A alone. Ida made sense, coming from a hero dynasty with one of the oldest agencies in Japan's history, and it was unsurprising to see a Yaoyorozu descendant walking the halls, despite the odd choice for a career path. He'd heard talk of an ex-hero student from the Aoyama family, which dealt primarily in selling luxury goods, and Jiru's parents owned and operated a well-known record label. Uraraka seemed to be one of the few students he'd met that didn't come from a prominent family, though she'd casually mentioned her parents owned a small construction business. Todoroki had been shocking to see only by virtue of being in the same class Izuku happened to be forced into. That, and his relation to Tuya. Izuku was all too familiar with Endeavor's sins, the revolting way he worked his children to the bone to create a worthy successor. He remembered the pain in Tuya's face as he recounted the perfect baby Shoto, Endeavor's latest prodigy and Tuya's replacement. Izuku wanted to ask Todoroki if he was safe from his father tucked away at school, but he doubted it would yield a positive response. Looking at him now, Izuku recognized the cold fire that glimmered in the boy's eyes. His one blue eye a near-perfect match for Tuya's. Surrounding it was a dark burn scar that covered nearly half of his face, and it made Izuku so angry he could have screamed. Todoroki's voice was softer than he'd expected, but low and even like his brother's. "You stood up to Bakugo." Bewildered, Izuku nodded. "I did. Is that not a common occurrence?" "In our class, yes, but most outside of it are afraid of him." The singer couldn't help but laugh. "He's aggressive, I'll give him that, but he doesn't scare me. I hear shouting almost every night, even if it's usually positive. No, it takes more than a few loud noises to scare me." Todoroki cocked his head. "You think we're all like him, don't you? That heroes are just bullies who want to hurt people?" He shook his head. Not all of you, no, but heroes wouldn't be popular if they handled law enforcement like the police do. Why do so many take exception to heroics? Because it's entertaining. And so long as it's entertaining, it's profitable, and that's dangerous." He doubted Eraserhead would approve of the turn their conversation had taken, but the man was paying them little attention as he watched the trial with intent, no doubt assigning their scores before they'd even finished. He turned back to see the others considering his words. Shinso stepped forward. "So it's the flashiness of heroics that bothers you." He seemed to understand that part of his argument, at least, though it was only a small part of the issue. Izuku made a noise that could have meant anything, then turned back to Todoroki. "You're Endeavor's kid, right?" The dual-toned boy eyed him warily. "That's right. Your dad's kind of a dick." Once again the silence stretched out, though it wasn't as incredulous as it had been before. Then Todoroki, whose face had remained doggedly impassive the entire conversation, broke into a wide grin. "He really is. Give him dark hair and an older face," Izuku thought with grief in his heart, "and he'd be the spitting image of Tuya." He knew his friends were alive, they had to be, but being so far from them was torturous. He was angry with Tuya and Tenko for lying to him, for doing whatever they'd done to bring the heroes down on them. But he missed them and worried for them more. Life hadn't been kind to any of them. It was what had bound the group together at first, and things weren't likely to get better unless Rody managed to get them some help. Or if Izuku managed to escape long enough to get it himself. A sharp horn rang out, the sound hitting Izuku like a blow and startling him. The first match had ended, with Bakugo's team declared the winners. The hothead sauntered out of the arena with a smug look, which darkened as he spotted Izuku. Not one to back down, Izuku matched the glare with one of his own. Todoroki and the others brushed past him to take their places at the front of the arena, passing a confused Uraraka. "Making friends?" she asked. "No, but at least I'm not making more enemies." Uraraka looked as though she didn't believe him. "Well, I'm glad you're starting to settle in here." Izuku continued his stare down with Bakugo, his mind racing from one thought to the next. If there was a way to get himself expelled, it would no doubt involve his newest enemy. Chapter 8. Nobody's Soldier. Shota stared into the open fridge with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. Nizu had all but ordered him to eat better and provide his charge with adequate meals, despite Shota's insistence that jelly pouches were plenty nutritious, and had a plethora of food options delivered to his apartment. For the first time since Shota had taken his position at UA, he had a fully stocked fridge. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cooked anything, relying solely on caffeine, convenience store food, and lunch rush to provide sustenance. He pushed everything aside to pluck one of his jelly pouches from the back corner. The brat could eat what he wanted, but as far as Shota was concerned, the rest could spoil. He checked his messages as he waited for his coffee to brew, trying to will Tsukachi to find the evidence faster. So far they hadn't found anything worthwhile, though Shota really hadn't expected them to. He trusted Tsukachi would find something eventually, some piece of Midoriya's past that provided a motive for joining the resistance group, but until that happened Shota would be forced to wait. He ignored the texts from Namiri begging him to join her and Hisashi for a night out, as she did almost every week. She'd been insisting he join them for months with no success, and each invitation was more aggressive than the last. At least with a captive in his spare bedroom, he had a legitimate excuse to decline. His phone chirped, letting him know it was time to wake the little revolutionary. He strode down the hall to the spare bedroom, where Power Loader had installed a reinforced door with a deadbolt on the outside. Nizu had called it overkill, but Shota wasn't taking any chances, and he certainly wasn't giving up any more sleep to this experiment the principal was forcing on him. He slid the deadbolt to the side, opening the door to find Midoriya already awake and frowning at the closet. In addition to stocking the fridge, Nizu had provided several school uniforms to Yue's newest student, a row of hangers displaying the garments proudly. Shota could see a few basic tees, lounge pants, and Yue tracksuits hanging as well, everything neat and orderly. On the floor sat a garish yellow backpack, no doubt filled with textbooks and school supplies. Midoriya pulled down one of the shirts, examining it. "That's probably closer to your size than the one you dumped in the boys' bathroom," Shota commented, watching as Midoriya fiddled with the buttons. "Get dressed and get some food before class." "You're feeding me now? I'm honored." Shota was too mature to flip off the bratty teenager, but only just. He returned to the kitchen, relaxing only once he heard the water begin to run in the bathroom. He found himself tensing every time Midoriya was out on his own, despite the increased security on campus, already anticipating his next escape attempt. He'd been getting mouthier these past few days, purposefully antagonizing Shota, his students, and his fellow teachers. He was testing the waters, looking for weak points within the school to exploit. Shota would have to be smarter, cutting off every move his captive made before he even made it. He was exhausted just thinking about it. Midoriya had no qualms about making his own breakfast, throwing together fish and soup and vegetables with practiced ease. Shota hadn't expected someone so young to be able to function in the kitchen, though he supposed he shouldn't assume anything about him given he had no real information to work with. Midoriya didn't ask if Shota wanted any, and the hero was too proud to request some, but he couldn't deny the breakfast smelled good. He grabbed a cup of coffee instead, ignoring the hunger that had come upon him. Midoriya ate at the counter, shoveling the food in so fast Shota was surprised he didn't choke. He then scrubbed the dishes and set them out to dry and left the kitchen without a word. Shota wanted to be annoyed with him but found it wasn't worth the effort. It's not like he used the kitchen beyond the coffee pot, and if Midoriya feeding himself kept him out of trouble, it was worth the hassle. Still, he didn't like Nizu meddling like this, rearranging Shota's private space and forcing him to cohabitate with a likely criminal. Hours later, Shota got the message he'd been waiting for. "I've got something on Midoriya." Mr. Aizawa was absent from afternoon training, leaving the responsibility to Class 3 BS teacher Vlad King. He was a strict man who put up with very little and, though she did her best to respect him as an educator, Achiko didn't much care for him. 3B joined her class as they often did for training, the 10 or so left in the class fitting comfortably with hers. With one notable exception. Deku was polite but standoffish with the 3B students, of whom only 2 recognized him from his music career. Yanagi took passing interest in both the music and the singer himself, while Tokage was more generous in her compliments. Like with Class A, Deku was more animated talking about his music but divulged little about himself, keeping conversation shallow until he was left alone. He was currently standing beside Shinso and Todoroki, not speaking to them but not arguing either, which Achiko took as a sign of progress. Vlad King called the students to gather around him as he explained the day's mission. "I'll be splitting you into 2 groups, heroes and villains. The heroes will work to capture the villains, while the villains will do their best to evade capture. Each hero will have to catch at least 1 villain to succeed. The villains will have the option to subdue the heroes or simply hide until time is up. When it's done, the teams will switch, then you'll do it again." Achiko shifted uncomfortably. She remembered their finals from second year where they'd performed a similar exercise. Only the heroes who didn't succeed were removed from the hero courses. It had been hard watching as Kota, Hagakure, and Ojiro had been sent bruised and bloody to the infirmary with their failing scores, to rejoin Class A in their dorms only long enough to collect their things and move to general studies. Aways, Shishida, Shota, Tetsu, and Kendo of Class B had fared the same, though it was rumored Kendo's parents had transferred her to Shiketsu's hero program in defiance. Achiko had no way of knowing if it was true. Most of her classmates looked as happy with the day's exercise as she did, though some hid it better than others. Deku was off to the side, his lips pressed together in clear distaste. He'd found his voice at UA in the few days he'd been there, hotly debating several of their teachers in a variety of subjects. He made no qualms about arguing with his classmates, and there was none he enjoyed fighting with more than Ida, Yamamo, and Bakugo. To their credit, the class president and vice president had valid points to their arguments, while Bakugo simply wanted an excuse to yell. It was hardly productive, yet Achiko's teachers almost seemed to enjoy the unfolding chaos. As for herself, she'd rather they all just keep the peace. Deku wasn't arguing now, though, instead giving Vlad King a reproachful look that did not go unnoticed. "Got something to say, kid?" The singer took offense to that, his glare turning indignant. "I'm not a kid and, since you asked, this whole exercise is pointless. You're having them hunt each other down for sport. Who does this help? Exactly." Vlad King's face turned sour, an impressive feat for someone who appeared sullen by default. "It's an exercise in catching lowlife scum, the bottom feeders who revel in suffering and violence." Deku paused to look around, his eyes finding every bruise, cut, and scrape visible on the hero students. He turned back to the hero with brows raised. "Looks like they're not the only ones." A dark look flashed across Vlad's face, before a nasty smile appeared. "Perhaps you need a hands-on experience to get what we're doing. You're joining the villains today, no exceptions." There was a round of complaints from the students, some about the disadvantage they'd have on the villain team, others about the safety concerns having an untrained civilian joining in the exercise would pose. Deku himself was refusing to participate, swearing he'd never take part in a morally objectionable display of aggression by the militant arm of the ruling class. She liked him well enough, but Deku was beginning to annoy Achiko. Bakugo succeeded in making matters worse, sauntering over with a look as nasty as Vlad's. "Come on, shitty rock star. Put your money where your mouth is. Unless you're scared. Figures you'd be all talk, just like those losers at your lame-ass concerts." Deku's nostrils flared and he readily accepted the challenge, just as Achiko knew he would. "Boys are so predictable." She stepped forward. "Sir, this is a bad idea. Deku doesn't have the basic training we all do, and I doubt he could keep up with us even if he did. This is like asking one of the first years to train with us. Deku would be lucky to last even a quarter of the training." She knew, and every moment of it would likely be agony for him. It did her no good, as Vlad Kind turned vengeful eyes on her. "I guess you'd better keep him safe then, villain. You'll be on his team this round. Good luck." And though it was her own words that had condemned her, Achiko couldn't help but glare at Deku, who was looking at the entrance to Ground Beta with a flat, angry expression. Izuku tried not to let his anxiety show as he entered the training grounds, feeling the looks and whispers cutting into him from behind. It was stupid to agree to this, but it was an opportunity all the same. He knew his disruptions in class and his acerbic commentary on heroes and class division had been aggravating his teachers and classmates, but it wasn't enough to earn the expulsion he'd been after. Eraserhead yelled at him, of course, but it hardly mattered if there was no action to accompany it. Joining the hero students for training was a good start, but goading Bakugo into attacking him might just do the trick. He was relieved. Before Vlad King decided to throw him to the wolves, Izuku was certain he'd have to either punch someone or make out with them in Eraserhead's office. And given his current lack of popularity, he imagined it would have to be the former. Uraraka was clearly annoyed with him but said nothing as they took their places. She, Kirishima, Kaminari, Azui, and Class B's Yanagi, Hananuki, and Tokage were selected as the villains, leaving everyone else to play heroes. From the Division 3 things were obvious. The hero team was given more students, leaving the split uneven. All of the strongest members were assigned to the hero group and, most obvious of all, the few students that actually seemed to like him were on his team, with the exception of Jairu. That sadistic teacher was likely trying to punish them for daring to associate with him, despite not knowing he was being held without cause. The speakers chimed and the round began, the villain students scrambling to make use of their head start. The Class B students broke apart and ran off in multiple directions, to hide or set traps for the heroes. Kaminari grabbed Kirishima and muttered something to him, the two agreeing to join forces and find a good vantage point. Izuku turned to Uraraka and Azui. "I'm not expecting you two to cover me out here. If you want to run off, you're more than welcome to." Uraraka looked sorely tempted but shook her head. "Heroes are supposed to help people, so I'll cover you. Besides, I know this layout better than you do." Count me in, Ribbit, came Ajui's reply. Even though we're playing villains, it wouldn't be right to just abandon you out here. We'll stick together. That way, we can stop Bakugo from killing you. Izuku wanted to point out that heroes didn't help the people that needed it most but wisely kept silent. He nodded to them in thanks and allowed them to take the lead, choosing a direction and running to it. He was grateful for his years of running and his experience in navigating Mizutofu cityscape, as it made keeping up with the other two far more manageable than he'd previously thought. He doubted he had the endurance to do so long-term, but for the moment he could keep pace. A second chime rang out like a death knell, Izuku's heart hammering as a flurry of sound exploded from the west. Uraraka never looked back, instead finding large chunks of debris littered throughout the streets and tapping them with her fingers. The refuse began to float in the air, moving at the girl's will until they formed craggy steps into the sky. She and Ajui wasted no time scrambling up them, leaping and floating up to the nearest roof. Izuku launched himself upward, just barely able to grab the first slab of concrete and hoist himself up. He managed to ascend clumsily behind the girls, slower than them but swift enough to land beside them after a few moments. Uraraka tapped her fingers together and the floating assembly of concrete, steel and earth plummeted down on the opposing team, slamming into some and impeding all in their chase. The trio navigated the rooftops easily, the rhythm of it bringing painful memories of his capture, of nights with Rhodey, to the surface. Izuku pushed them down before the grief incapacitated him and kept running, ignoring the sting in his eyes. He told himself it was just the wind. They found an entrance to one of the buildings via a heavy metal door that opened onto a cavernous staircase. Ushering them inside, Uraraka slammed the door after them, her fingers brushing the surface. The metal groaned in reply, made impossibly heavier by her power. Izuku had seen enough of each student in 3A during training to glean a rudimentary knowledge of their abilities, though it had yet to serve him any purpose. They took a moment to regroup, Uraraka and Ajui leaning their heads together to strategize. For his part, Izuku caught his breath, determined to look more confident than he felt. He was winded already, and the match had only just begun. By his count, they had at least 25 minutes left before the exercise would end, unless Vlad chose to extend the time until Izuku himself was caught or sufficiently embarrassed by the hero students. He wouldn't put it past him. "Sue and I have compatible quirks," Uraraka told him once they'd finished strategizing. "We can likely evade the other team until time is called, but it will be harder for you if you have to keep up on foot." He couldn't disagree with that, his muscles already tight from nerves. It wouldn't take long for him to stumble in such an environment, stressful but not life-threatening enough to kickstart his instincts. "What if you made me float, and Ajui propelled me with her tongue between buildings?" Uraraka shook her head. "We wouldn't be able to control your landings. I'm able to manipulate the gravitational field around me, but not far enough to ensure you don't hit the ground hard. And Tsu's tongue can only reach so far." "What about your quirk, Ribbit? Got anything we can use?" Izuku had been dreading that question since he'd first been captured and, just as he had then, he didn't want to answer it. He couldn't answer it, not here, not with so many enemies around him. "It's not anything that will help us. Maybe you two should go on without me. It's clear I'm only slowing you down." He'd thought he was providing the two with an easy out, a way to graciously dump him in favor of getting a passing score, but they only frowned at him. "I told you, heroes don't abandon people in need." Izuku was beginning to grow annoyed with their constant misguided optimism. "Look, I appreciate you trying to help me, but I can make my own way from here. I'm faster than you give me credit for, and I'm good at dodging people." At least he was, until Eraserhead managed to kidnap him. Instead of accepting what was in his mind a polite but firm rebuffing with their thanks, Uraraka let out a frustrated groan. "What's your problem, Deku? Why won't you let us help you?" "Because I don't need it," he snapped, the frustration and terror and helplessness of the last few days finally undoing him. "I haven't needed a hero to help me in years, and I don't plan on needing them now." The room fell silent, the echoes of their pursuers distant enough to be only murmurs outside the window. Uraraka took a step back, her expression stricken. "You really do hate us," Ida tried to tell me, but "I don't hate you," Izuku bit out. "I just don't need you. Why do heroes always think everyone needs them, HM? because they have to believe it to justify what little they do for this country. Heroes infantilize the common people because they can't fathom how a community that cares for one another could ever be more powerful than some wealthy elites that spit fire or can fly to the moon. It's about money and power, Uraraka, that's what heroes really are. You won't let me go off on my own. That psychopath Bakugo wants to bloody me just for having a different opinion. How else am I supposed to feel about that? Azui was looking between the two with a flat expression. She's not rich, you know. Achiko's a scholarship student as well. Uraraka nodded, the pain evident in her eyes. I understand you better than you think, Deku. My parents struggle financially, so I don't have the luxury of slacking off or letting my grades slip. If it weren't for the scholarship, I don't think I could have even gone to a lesser hero school. I know how you feel. No, you don't, he whispered, the words thunderous despite their softness. I'm sure you've known hardship. I won't deny that. But have you ever gone hungry, Uraraka? Have you ever picked through a dumpster for scraps to eat, only to throw it up an hour later? Have you ever lost a tooth to hunger, felt it soften and rot in your mouth as your body slowly, painfully cannibalizes itself? Have you ever slept on top of a building because heroes kept shooing you off the street? You might not be wealthy, but I'd be willing to bet you've always had a home, a warm bed and regular meals, so don't tell me you know how I feel. His voice had grown louder as he spoke, spreading until it filled the room and bounced back to him. His pain and anger and sorrow ringing out and pulsating against him, against everything. He wasn't crying, but it was a near thing. Uraraka had tears in her eyes and Azui was refusing to look at him. He'd been so upset he hadn't heard her approach, but the slightest scuff of a shoe against wood had Izuku turning until he saw Jairu standing in the doorway, looking incredibly uncomfortable. She was holding the capture tape given to the hero team, the bright red adhesive dangling limply from her palm like blood dripping from an open wound. Izuku sighed, stepping forward with his hands out. Better her than Bakugo, he supposed. To his surprise, she turned on her heel and quickly fled, muttering a low, I didn't see you, to the group. Izuku turned to look at the two girls, who had composed themselves enough to meet his eye. I'm sorry, I didn't. He hadn't meant to say any of that. He cursed himself for his weakness, for giving up too much to these strangers. I didn't mean to yell at you. He followed Jairu out into the hall without another word, hoping to get as far away from the moment as he could. Chapter 9. Don't threaten me with a good time. Things had calmed slightly in the streets below. The hero team fanned out searching for their targets. Izuku did his best to keep his ears open, listening for any movement coming his way, but his mind was scattered. Why had he said that? Uraraka's loyalty to heroes was obviously misguided, but she'd been nothing but kind to him. It wasn't fair of me to yell at her, he thought, jumping to a nearby building and crouching low to keep from view. But it's not fair of her to pretend to know how I feel, when heroes like her are the reason I act this way. Still, the guilt burned low in his gut, anxiety thrumming against his skin as he traversed the rooftops of the training grounds. A thin whistling sounded from behind him, the only warning he got before the explosion hit. Instinctively, Izuku leapt to the side, finding shelter behind a large air conditioning unit. The heat from the blast surged around him as the metal took the brunt of the hit, growing hot to the touch. Izuku peeked out from his hiding spot to see Bakugo land a few feet away. Vengeful red eyes locked on him. Yaoyorozu appeared next, landing gracefully on the building he'd come from and cutting off Izuku's escape route. A quick glance around confirmed there was no rooftop access to the building beneath him, leaving the singer trapped and at the hero team's mercy. Bakugo's grin was as mean as it was victorious. Nowhere to run now, shitty-ass wannabe. A flutter of sound drew his attention up to Shinso perched above him, his eyes curious as he took in the scene. Izuku turned back to Bakugo, whose hands were beginning to smoke. I've got 2 days' worth of sweat built up in these, he gloated, holding up his heavy gauntlets. Make a move and I'll blow you to pieces. Just try me. Izuku blanched. Did you say sweat? His quirk turns his sweat into nitroglycerin, Yaoyorozu called out, all too eager to answer a question she hadn't been asked. He ignites the sweat with his palms to make his blasts. Shut it, Ponytail. Stop helping the enemy. A laugh burst from Izuku's lips, ringing against the metal and glass of the buildings around him. The others were startled by it, eyeing him warily. "What's so funny, asshole?" I'm sorry, you're sweaty? Your big bad superhero power is that you're sweaty." His laughter only got louder, Bakugo's face turning bright red in response. "Shut the hell up. I'll kill you. With your sweat, right? You're going to sweat me to death." Above him, Shinso let out a low chuckle and Yaoyorozu, polite as always, hid her smile behind her hand. "Fucking die." Bakugo shot forward, propelled by his blasts, and Izuku took his opening. He slid beneath his attacker and to the edge of the building, leaping to the next and sprinting as his pursuers changed course. Bakugo was the loudest, his screams and explosions nearly drowning out Yaoyorozu's softer footsteps and Shinso's nearly undetectable ones. He spotted a fire escape hugging the building across from him, and Izuku leapt to that one next, nearly missing the small lip that ringed the metal staircase. He held on tightly, swinging himself over the railing and onto solid ground, allowing himself no time to catch his breath as he scrambled down to the street. Before he could choose his next path, he was flung forward, heat and force slamming into his back and sending him sprawling. He hit the pavement hard, sharp gravel stabbing into him and embedding themselves into his skin. He gasped for air, the smoke from the explosion filling his lungs with each sputtering breath. He'd never been hit so hard in his life. He felt a hand grab his hair and yank his head back, Izuku's vision swimming from the sudden movement. "Don't even think about dash." He jerked himself away, yelping in pain as hair tore from his scalp. He twisted and kicked, landing a solid hit in Bakugo's groin and scrambled to his feet. Bakugo recoiled in pain and Izuku allowed himself one strong punch to the other boy's jaw, the blow likely hurting him more than his assailant. He managed to put some distance between them before Ida, late to the fight, arrived with the other heroes, cornering him once again. Bakugo's face was dark with fury. "You'll pay for that cheap shot." Izuku's back and head began to throb in tempo, his skin buzzing with panic as the heroes penned him in on all sides. The world was growing louder, shouts and heavy footsteps echoing all around him. He heard the crackle of Bakugo's palms, the whir of Ida's engines, the odd tinkling of Yaoyorozu summoning her creations, all pulled to him like the pull of the tides. He reached up to his throat, horrified to feel the leather of his choker singed and frayed and entirely useless. He screamed, and the world exploded. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Achiko came to a dead stop as the shockwave hit her, the force of it nearly enough to knock her over. Sue stopped as well, her eyes darting all around them to find the source. "Bakugo." "Maybe," Achiko replied, though she wasn't certain. Bakugo's blasts were powerful but well controlled, never extending beyond where he wanted them to. Additionally, his blasts produced little to no aftershock. This blast was nothing but aftershocks, continuously rolling against her like the tides lapping the shore. For a brief moment she thought about Jairu and her heartbeat distortions, but never before had those shockwaves carried voices on them. The echoes of whispers and shouts and every sound Uraraka had heard since the training began now surrounding her. She turned back to Tsu. "We should investigate." "Should we? This could be a trap, you know. Shinso, Kyoka and Momo are on the hero team. Ribbit, this could be part of some strategy to lure us in." Achiko pointed to a nearby building, where the glass windows had begun to shake violently against their frames. "I don't think they'd do something like that. Something's wrong, Tsu." They quarreled a bit longer before agreeing to investigate, both tense with the knowledge they might be walking into a trap. As they moved closer to the source of the strange shockwaves, Achiko became more and more certain this wasn't a trap. She could feel the push of them, almost urging her to turn and run the other way. She nearly did as another pulse hit her, strong enough to knock her to the ground and fill her ears with an unearthly scream. She felt the wind leave her, not from the fall but from an awful recognition. She knew that sound. Wide eyes found Tsu. It's Deku. She'd heard screams like this on the band's latest album, far more controlled and musical as opposed to the pained, angry sound she was hearing now. She got to her feet, taking unsteady steps closer to the screams. As she rounded a building that had lost all of its windows, the glass laying shattered in the street, she got her first true look at Deku. His skin and hair were caked with dirt and blood, his track suit singed and torn. The leather choker, which he'd been wearing religiously since she'd first met him, was hanging loosely at the base of his neck by a few thin threads. His green eyes were wide and panicked, and his mouth gaped as he screamed again. Achiko felt a hand grab her as Ida appeared beside her in an instant, dragging her to shelter behind the building with just as much haste. "What's happening?" Her words were distorted, too quiet and too loud and completely discordant with the cacophony Deku was making. Her voice would stretch thin, then slam back towards her, the sound beautiful and terrible all at once. Ida's face was grim behind his helmet, the metal dented and the visor cracked. I don't know. Deku seems to have some kind of sound quirk, but it's completely out of control. No one's been able to get close since the initial blast." He jerked his chin to the buildings across the street, likely where the others were hiding. "Attacking with our own quirks has been fruitless as well. Even ranged attacks from Bakugo and Yaoyorozu can't reach him." Sue came up beside them, her hands pressed firmly to her ears. "Do you think I could reach him with my tongue?" "Perhaps, though it's a part of your body and we don't know what exactly this quirk is. I wouldn't want you getting hurt, Azui." "It's Sue," she reminded him, out of habit more than anything. Ida had never once used the nickname, or any nickname for that matter, and he never allowed anyone to call him by his first name. Too informal, he would say, inappropriate, he would declare, and then he'd pretend the conversation had never happened in the first place. They considered Ida a friend, but Achiko was unconvinced they'd ever spend time together once school was over and their adult lives truly began. The screaming stopped, and just as abruptly the shifting, echoing sounds ebbed and left the world silent. Achiko peeked around the corner, her eyes widening as she spotted Deku, white-faced and trembling, squeezing his own throat tightly. The choker he'd clung to like a lifeline was gone, lost somewhere in the chaos. He shook his head violently when he spotted her approaching, taking an instinctive step back. "Don't," his eyes told her. But she couldn't stand by when someone was in pain, when someone so clearly needed her help no matter what insults he screamed at her. She held her hands up, inching closer. Deku had gone completely still, but he didn't make any further protest as she carefully made her way through the ravaged street. Before she could reach him, however, they were interrupted by Bakugo's enraged scream. He launched himself from behind his own building and, with all the subtlety of a bomb, threw himself at Deku. Achiko wisely ducked behind the now empty hiding spot as Deku, releasing his iron grip on his throat, let out another scream. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Sukachi Station was livelier than it had been a few nights prior, Shota noted, with more officers than he'd ever seen bustling about. "We called in extra help from neighboring towns," the detective told him as they navigated the now cramped bullpen. "We're combing through every database we can think of to find more on this Meta Liberation Army, but there's only so much time in the day, and our tech is, well..." He didn't need to explain. Shota had seen more than enough police stations with scant resources and technology that hadn't seen any real development in close to 100 years. What need did the police have for advanced tech, the Hero Commission would argue, when heroes can get the job done with only their abilities and support gear at their disposal? Shota's work systems were far newer and better supported, but that was due entirely to his working for the country's highest-rated hero school. If there was one place the government was willing to invest, it was future heroes. Shota tried his best not to think about it. They arrived at a small conference room, where Officer Tamagawa, Sir Night Eye, and a few officers and sidekicks Shota didn't know awaited them. It was a relief to not see Nizu among them, but Shota knew he'd be forced to debrief the principal on the meeting regardless. Sukachi moved to the head of the small table while Shota, ever antisocial, leaned casually against the far wall. "So, what's this new information you've found?" Sukachi nodded to a whiteboard, on which several documents and photos were displayed and marked with bits of string. Until he'd met the detective, Shota had always believed this particular method of organizing evidence was simply a product of bad television. There were photos of each of Midoriya's band members as well as Midoriya himself, but there were also photos of the suspected Liberation Front members on the edges of the board, their strings all connected to each other but few connected to the band. Sukachi plucked a document from beneath Midoriya's photo. sliding it across the table. Shota moved to examine it. It was a hospital record for someone named Lucia Sol, age 8, admitted to a local clinic the previous winter for a mild case of bronchitis. Her name stood out like a beacon on the page, clearly foreign, and at once his mind went to the teenager in Midoriya's band, the one they had no records of. Lucia's quirk had yet to be determined, and the treatment administered to her was light in comparison to more serious cases of the disease. Signed and dated on the intake form were two names, Rhoda Sol and Izuku Midoriya. They have a dependent, he muttered, more to himself than to the room. They have two, as far as we can tell. The girl attends an elementary school not far from here with an older brother, Renato Sol. Both Rhoda Sol and Midoriya are listed there as emergency contacts, and I wouldn't be surprised if they had some documents hidden away claiming guardianship of the two, forged or otherwise. That caught Shota's attention. Forged legal documents would be grounds for detaining Midoriya properly, which meant a proper cell in Tartarus to go with the charges. The thought made him feel only slightly guilty, for even though Midoriya was far from the wretched criminal Shota usually dealt with, he was still a pest. He told himself it was better this way, with Midoriya secluded behind prison walls and in no position to endanger Shota's students. He mulled over the names, puzzling them out. They're obviously foreigners, but their names? Italian? Spanish roots, from what I know, came Nitai's inevitable answer. But the European languages overlap to a large degree. Spanish names are common in Atheon and Clade as well, being so close to one another off the Celtic Sea. Shota nodded. Night-Eye had an uncanny knack for always knowing a bit too much, even without his clairvoyance. The man came up swiftly beside him. There's an address on file with the school. With permission, my staff and I can enter the premises and search for anything incriminating. What good would that do? Shota muttered. It's been days since the raid. The ones that escaped likely destroyed any evidence. Perhaps, if they knew it existed. He looked up to meet those piercing yellow eyes, so intensely serious they made Shota's harshest glares look like smiles. We'd also have to consider what would happen to the children if we took Sol into custody as well. They'd be shipped off to an orphanage within a day, and being so young and foreigners at that. Shota couldn't hold back a frown. Orphanages were notoriously underfunded, understaffed, and largely ignored by the population at large. The children were terribly mistreated in most cases, by their peers at school if not by the orphanage itself. Shota had seen only one case involving an orphan in his time as a hero, and the less he thought about it, the better. Perhaps a stakeout, Tsukachi offered, his eyes darting between the two. We can track Sol's movements and, hopefully, find where the others are hiding. We might even find some of the Liberation Army members if we're careful. He nodded to the file. There's more. Shota kept reading until he found what he was meant to. Listed under family were both Sol and Midoriya's names, with their quirks listed beside them. His quirk is listed as Sol. That's a bit on the nose. Izuku Midoriya, lullaby. A singer with a singing quirk. Night-Eye commented dryly. Will wonders never cease? Shota chuckled, but something about the quirk didn't sit right with him. Midoriya had yet to display any abilities to them beyond the athleticism he'd used to run from the authorities. Yet he couldn't help but think back to that evening in the interrogation room, when Tsukachi couldn't parse the truth from Midoriya's words. No, there was something else at work here, and a singing quirk was far too easy an answer. It was clear the others were thinking it too. Though his gaze was still sharp as ever, Night-Eye was smiling as he said, I'll have my team look into the clinic's records further. There may yet be more to this mystery for us to uncover. He likes you, you know, Tsukachi told Shota once the others had left. Shota was well aware of it. The past few moths he'd seen the glances, the closeness, the half-whispered jokes only meant for him to hear, but he'd paid all of it little attention. If you say so. The other man frowned. I know so. I recognize the signs. You recognize when a man is attracted to another man, one nearly 30 years his junior? Shota asked with a raised brow. Tsukachi was as open-minded as they came, but when it came to sexual preference he was painfully inflexible. I recognize when someone is interested in my friend, someone who shouldn't be. Shota didn't see the problem if truth be told. Night-Eye was older, yes, but still handsome. He was rigid in his convictions but amiable outside of work, sometimes even humorous. Shota wouldn't mind a man like that if he were at all interested in a relationship. He preferred his solitude, opting for the occasional one-night stand when his carnal desires got the best of him, or when the night itself was a particularly lonely one. He hadn't even dated in high school, to much ridicule from his friends, but he'd been happy alone. He still was, as far as anyone else was concerned. Perhaps if Sir Night Eye was open to something purely physical, Shota would entertain the idea. It had been quite some time since he'd last been intimate with someone. His phone chimed with a message from Nizu, followed shortly by one from Ida, one from Yaoyorozu, and one from Recovery Girl, all providing different accounts of the same problem. Midoriya's in the infirmary. Vlad let him join the training today and he got hurt. His friend sighed and Shota slid his phone back into his pocket, his expression hardening. No, he couldn't entertain anything with anyone. Not even a night out with Namuri and Hizashi, with Midoriya under his roof. Just another thing he'd have to go without. Chapter 10, Self-Sabotage. When Izuku next opened his eyes, he found himself lying atop a stiff, cramped bed in a sterile room filled with sunlight. His head throbbed in protest at the brightness of it, pain pulsating along his skull and radiating outward. It took a few blinks for his eyes to adjust, but when they did, he was greeted by several disapproving faces. An old woman, short and gray, was at his bedside, checking his vitals. Beside her sat Uraraka and Azui, the two eyeing him warily. At the foot of the bed stood Eraserhead, dark and dour as ever, and cuddled on his shoulder was the strangest creature Izuku had ever seen, furry and white and clad in a three-piece suit and chunky orange sneakers. "You're awake," the creature chirped, its lips pulled back in what Izuku guessed to be a smile. "Thank goodness for that. Your friends have been so worried about you." "My friends have no idea where I am," Izuku thought bitterly. He could feel his anger burning hotly within him, so powerful it nearly overwhelmed the constant buzzing against his skin. He froze, his fingers reaching frantically for his throat and finding nothing but smooth, bare skin. Wild eyes found the hero students, then Eraserhead, the question written plain across his face. "Your choker was destroyed," Uraraka said finally, her fingers twitching nervously in her lap. Was she afraid of him? It came off at some point during the fight. Azui reached into the pocket of her skirt, pulling out the mangled leather. "I'm guessing this is some sort of power suppressor ribbit. You looked terrified on the field after it ripped." Izuku could only nod, shame and anger and guilt washing over him. He should have known better than to join the fighting, should have never goaded Bakugo into attacking him so viciously. Only he had to try something to get out of this place, no matter the risk. Now he had no one to blame for his recklessness but himself, and he couldn't even do so aloud. He glanced around the room, finding no other patients. "We have you in an isolated room," Eraserhead told him gruffly. "Can't risk another incident with your quirk." He folded his arms across his chest, the movement nearly unseating the talking animal atop his shoulder. "Care to explain how a singing quirk managed to destroy a square mile of city and hospitalize 3 hero students?" Curiously, the insistent thrum of the ambient sounds dimmed as Eraserhead's eyes began to glow, fixed on him with a grave intensity. Izuku let out the smallest of sounds, flinching as it left him, then relaxing once he realized nothing had happened. He felt almost as grounded as he did with his choker on, though he knew Eraserhead couldn't stare forever. He didn't want to, but Izuku could tell there was no going back. No way to recapture that mystery he'd been holding onto the past few days. He took his moment to speak, unsure of how long he would have to do so. "My quirk diagnosis is old, back from when I was a kid. It's different now, or maybe it's always been this way, and the specialist was incompetent. Either way, I don't really know what my quirk is, only that it's dangerous. My choker kept it contained, so I could talk and sing without worrying about hurting anyone." Eraserhead held his palm out expectantly, and Azui swiftly deposited the accessory into it. He examined it, then handed it off to Nizu. Was that strange animal really Yue's principal? And returned his red gaze to Izuku. "Where did you get this? Quirk suppressing technology isn't available to the public at large." And what a grave injustice that was, for such useful tech to be held covetously by the government. Anger flared in his gut, but it was a useless feeling, one that only served to cause him discomfort. Izuku couldn't name the source of his choker without condemning Jiren, who had procured the piece for him so many years ago, and providing further cause to investigate his friends. That doesn't matter, what matters is I need it fixed. I can't really talk without it. What a shame, muttered Eraserhead, and Izuku offered him a rude gesture in response. We'd be happy to provide you with any support gear you may need, Nizu chirped, ignoring their childish behavior. After all, if you're going to be in the hero course, you'll need proper gear. Perhaps even a suit of your own. I'm not a hero, he said vehemently, just as Eraserhead and Uraraka replied with equal sentiment. I don't want a hero suit. I just want to be able to talk without hurting someone, without repeating the same mistake he'd made in his childhood. He still remembered how the blood smelled, what those screams felt like wrapping all around him. He shook his head. Are the others okay? They will be, the older woman told him, peering at him with curious eyes. Bakugo got the worst of it, but he's in better shape than I expected. And Yaoyorozu and Ida sustained minor injuries at most. Nothing I haven't seen before. She leaned in closer. I find it more surprising that you're not more seriously injured. Some cuts and burns. Yes, and exhausted and dehydrated to boot. But you seem to be quite resilient for a civilian. Izuku wasn't sure what to make of that, but he muttered a soft thanks to the woman for caring for him. She gave him the smallest of smiles, offering him a strange sort of comfort. Nizu was not easily deterred. You'll at least need to learn to control your powers. You can't rely on Quirk suppressors forever, you know, and what better place to learn? I have just the tutor in mind, someone who understands your plight perfectly. Izuku gave him a doubtful look, but Nizu kept his cheerful smile until his tutor arrived. Present Mike entered with as much grace as a freight train, and just as quietly. Hey there, little listeners. Present Mike was a tall man, his blonde pompadour making him even more so, with a thin, wiry build. He had a loud voice and a personality to match, and his smile was almost too big to fit his face. Nizu's own smile was smaller, but no less enthusiastic. Yamada, always a pleasure. Thank you again for agreeing to mentor our dear Deku. Izuku had spent a few classes with the loud, tacky man already, though his English was good enough to spend the lectures ignoring him. For his part, Mike had never tried to single him out the way Vlad King had, treating Izuku as he would any other student. Mike turned his smile to the convalescent, the corners of his short, thin mustache twitching. Great to see you again, kid. Don't worry. By the time I'm done with you, you'll be as good with your voice as I am. Hoo-hoo. The buzzing against his skin returned, along with the full force of Present Mick's considerable volume. Eraserhead was now looking at Present Mike with annoyance and concern, which meant all Izuku could do in response to the man's shouting was frown. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Shota waited until Recovery Girl had administered the sedative to Midoriya, the angry boy's face smoothing to a peaceful expression. Waited until Azui and Uraraka muttered quiet goodbyes and quieter apologies to the room. Waited longer still to enter the hallway with Nizu in tow, then let his anger win out. What the hell was Vlad thinking, letting Midoriya join training? And what are you thinking, having Mike train him? By this time of day the halls were deserted, the students all too eager to soak in the last of summer's heat out on the campus green. Yamada will make a wonderful teacher for Midoriya, came Nizu's carefree response. He has a similar ability, and he's done marvels working with some of our trickier students. Midoriya is a prisoner, not a student, Shota hissed. And not to mention dangerous. He'd seen the footage from ground beta, the destruction Midoriya was able to unleash in just a few short minutes. That kind of power could level the entire campus, and instead of sending the boy off to Tartarus where he belonged, Nizu was giving him homework. He'll be less dangerous once he's learned to control his quirk. Midoriya needs that control to function in society. Really, it's irresponsible to simply throw a suppressor on the problem, rather than face it. And if he learns control, what then? He'll have another tool to use against us, another way to put our real students in jeopardy. So, better he not learn at all? I'm disappointed in you, Eraser. Shota could feel his temple begin to throb. Objectively, he knew the principal was right about Midoriya needing to learn control, but he wouldn't allow that lesson to come at the expense of his students, nor the investigation he and Tsukachi had been working tirelessly. He shouldn't be here, Nizu. He put 3 of our best students in the hospital, and that's without proper training. If he really does have ties to the Liberation Army, or if he decides to join them after his less than ideal time with us, we'd be foolish to train him like we do the hero students. Nizu gave him a rare frown. Use your eyes, Eraser. Midoriya abhors violence. He only harmed his classmates because he couldn't hold back his power. If we teach him to control his output, he can go back his normal life once the investigation ends. If we don't, he'll be a danger to himself and others, and we'd really be foolish to do that. Give the boy a chance, have a little faith. Only Nizu could make an order sound like a pleading request, and Shota knew this was a fight he couldn't hope to win. He deposited the fuzzy creature at a fork in the hallway, watching as he sauntered off in the direction of his office. Shota made for his own office, both pleased and annoyed to find Shinso lounging inside of it. Shota's office was much like his apartment had been before Nizu's meddling, sparse and utilitarian. He kept no mementos on his desk, which instead was littered with ungraded papers and case files from the few missions he worked outside of campus. His desk chair was well-worn but higher end than one might expect, and the couch Shinso was currently sprawled across was just comfortable enough to pass out on when the caffeine crashes inevitably hit him. There was little to no warmth in his space, but Shota didn't mind. He gave Shinso a hard look, crossing his arms over his chest. What happened to keeping an eye on him? Shinso was nonplussed by his teacher's look. I did keep an eye on him. He put 3 of your classmates in the hospital. Yeah, my other eye saw that bit. Shota moved behind his desk, sinking into the plush chair with bone-deep weariness. Shinso joined him in the chair opposite him, stretching like a cat after a nap. I did object to him joining the exercise, Vlad hates him for some reason, probably the same reason you asked me to spy on the new kid, and he wouldn't listen to reason when the rest of us objected. Honestly, Deku and Bakugo both got what they deserved for picking fights with each other. Shota raised a brow. How quickly you forget all the fights you had with Bakugo when you first joined the hero course. The tips of Shinso's ears pinked. I remember. That's why I don't feel sorry for him. He's alive, isn't he? And someone besides Todoroki was strong enough to land him on his ass. Considering Deku's never trained for combat a day in his life, that's impressive. Impressive wasn't the word Shota would have used, but that didn't mean that Shinso was wrong. He kept that thought to himself, staying silent and letting his students squirm. Shinso might not be afraid of Shota any longer, but he was still eager to please, to win his teacher's approval, and Shota had few qualms about letting him talk until he gave him something useful. Took only seconds. Look, I didn't tell you this, but before Deku went haywire, he fought with Uraraka. I don't know the whole story, but it sounds like he had rough upbringing, was maybe even on the streets for a while. I didn't hear everything, Jairu interrupted the fight, but that might have been what triggered his meltdown. Well, that and Bakugo hunting him. Shota let the words hang in the air, unsure of how to take them. Midoriya was troubled, that had been obvious from the start, but it was unnerving to learn that something much darker than Shota had expected could be lurking in the boy's past. He dismissed Shinso with a nod and his thanks, feeling only a bit guilty at his students' quiet but visible pleasure at the approbation. As one problem left, another entered. Hizashi was roughly the same height as Shota, though his ridiculously coiffed hair made him look taller. The tips of it tickled the frame of the door as he entered, quieter than he'd been in the infirmary, but still far louder than Shota liked. What is it now? Ah, come on. Don't pretend you aren't stoked to see me. Hizashi flopped into the seat Shinso had just vacated. His gangly limbs splayed in every direction. I'm just checking in with my favorite sensei. Don't call me that, Shota grumbled. He regarded the other man, searching for any of his usual mischief in his expression and finding none. Look, Sho, I want you to know I'm going to do my best to help Midoriya. I know you think the kid is a criminal and a waste of time, but I know I can get through to him. Shota bit back a grimace. Did everyone think him so faithless? It was true he didn't have much hope for rehabilitating Midoriya, and he was most certainly tired of sharing an apparent with him, but he believed wholeheartedly in his students and their ability to succeed. Did none of that matter now that a possible terrorist was knocking down buildings and preaching political reform? He pinched the bridge of his nose. I know you're a great teacher, Mike, but Midoriya's a wild card. I don't want you getting caught up in his mess. That's all. Hisashi waved his arms emphatically. But that's what teachers do, Sho. They take the pain so their students can learn without hurting. I can take a beating, no problem. I just want the best for the little listener, and I know deep down you do, too. His smile was bright, too bright, and Shota had to look away. Maybe the others were right, maybe he had been too harsh on Midoriya. Part of it was resentment, not for him but for the villains he associated with. Shota had never been one to tolerate villainy, no matter the reasoning behind it. Another part of him was afraid of what Midoriya and his villains might do to his students, if given the chance. It was Shota's job to protect his class, even if it meant leaving Midoriya in the dust. He supposed he would have to learn to be kinder. He gave Hisashi a smile, small but genuine. All right, you win. I'll play nice if I have to. Hisashi beamed. Righteous. Chapter 11, Goddess. And the whole area was destroyed like that. Achiko snapped her fingers for emphasis, fully committed to her storytelling as she regaled her captive audience. The audience in question were the men and women who worked for her father's construction company. They were a lively bunch, their ages ranging from Achiko's age to older than even her father, and all adored her. Thankfully, no one was seriously hurt, but Bakugo was fuming when he woke up. Here he thought he'd found an easy target. And then bam! Never thought I'd meet someone louder than Bakugo. It wasn't uncommon for her to laze about the various construction sites with the company on weekends. When she found a spare hour or two to get away from campus, the sounds of metal scraping against metal, ground breaking and hoarse voices shouting almost soothing to her. She was seated on a large stack of girders, nibbling on the last remains of her lunch as the workers, getting a stern glance from Achiko's father, returned to their duties. Her parents' latest contract was with the city, set for the next 2 years to renovate abandoned apartment buildings. They were at one such building, the workers trudging in and out with their equipment. It was early days for the project, with Achiko's father still tied to the drafting table and muttering to himself. He'd taken a short break to spend time with his daughter, but Achiko could tell his mind was far away from their spot in the corner of the work site. Crazy, huh? Yeah, crazy, her father replied, not quite listening to her. He'd always been attentive to her growing up, but with money getting tighter and work hours growing longer, there was only so much he could give her these days. Achiko understood his burden, though she was still hurt by it. Ordinarily she'd take this as her cue to leave, but a thought had been nagging at her since the start of the weekend, and there was no one else she wanted to ask. Hey Dad, what do you do if there's someone you want to help, but they won't let you? She'd been thinking about Deku's extreme reaction to her during training, how he'd been almost insulted by her attempts to empathize with him. She could tell there was a lot of hurt in his past, and maybe she had been a bit too hasty in trying to befriend him, but she couldn't help but feel as though she'd done the right thing. She also didn't like that he'd tried to make her feel guilty simply for having a stable home life. It's not like she had any control over that, no more than he did. She'd had to ask it a second time, but her father considered her question seriously. Do you mean as a hero, or as a person? He was always separating the two, as though it were impossible to be both at the same time. Both, I guess. He took a long moment to weigh his words, the corners of his mouth downturned as he did. As a hero, you'll probably have to save a lot of people who don't want your help, or don't think that they need it. Humans are prideful, and most of us don't like to show when we're hurt or vulnerable. As a hero, you get to make that split-second judgment call because it's your job to. As a person. He paused again. As a person, it's not really up to you. You can extend your hand to someone in need, but it's up to them to decide to take it. You may fault them for refusing help when they need it, but that's not a fair reaction. You've never shied away from asking for help, and I'm very proud of you for it. But not everyone is used to being offered help. Not everyone is offered help from others with good intentions. I'd say, as a person, the most important thing to do when someone refuses help is to respect their decision, but be ready to reach that hand out again when they're ready to take it. Achiko bit her lip, as though she were chewing on his words. She didn't like his answer because it meant she was in the wrong for forcing her goodwill on Deku, but it was good, sound advice, and she appreciated that far more than being in the right. Thanks, Dad. I think I know what to do now. She didn't know what to do, but there was no need to worry him. And though it was tinged with exhaustion, the smile he gave her made Achiko feel 10 times better. Anytime. Asterisk 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 asterisk. She had a few hours left before she needed to be back on campus, so Achiko left the construction site in search of a convenience store to stock up on junk food. UA provided all manner of healthy meals from Lunch Rush's cafeteria, but rarely could they find any sugary, processed delights on campus. Hero students had even fewer options, as they were given a diet plan every 6 months to follow. It wasn't mandatory, of course, merely a nutritional guide to keeping themselves in peak condition for hero training, but it was an unspoken rule that students were expected to follow the plan as closely as possible. Many of her classmates who had strayed too far from their diet, or ignored it altogether, performed poorly in training and in the finals, which resulted in expulsion from the course. Achiko was strict about her diet during the week, but, like many of the third-year hero students, had found little ways here and there to treat herself without risking her performance in class. A life without Machi, after all, was not one she considered worth living. The closest store was a few miles away, but she could have ran the distance without so much as breaking a sweat. Forgoing the train, she set out on foot, taking in the sounds of the bustling city. Her family lived on the outskirts of Mizudafu, coming into the city for work and school and the occasional parade, but she hadn't felt connected to it then. Now, after years of patrolling the streets, taking trips to the movies or the mall with her classmates, or even going on junk food runs, Achiko could confidently call the city hers. She loved the city, which made it all the more important to her to protect it. She was halfway to her destination when Achiko heard the voices, sly and taunting, coming from around the corner. She crept closer to a narrow side street, the buildings on either side looming above it. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting the alley in a shadowy haze. Peeking around the corner, she spotted 2 men and a woman cornering somebody, their body language menacing. Achiko didn't need to be a hero student to know this could only mean trouble. She continued forward, her training instinctively kicking in as she approached. She could hear the 2 men threatening their victim, while the woman stood a step behind, shoulders tense. She was listening for her, or anyone who might happen across them. Achiko knew she'd have only seconds to act once the woman noticed her. Activating her quirk, Achiko could feel the gravity around them begin to lift. She'd evolved her quirk to the point of creating her own gravitational field, able to push and pull, to increase or decrease the weight anything within it. She focused the effect on the attacker's clothes, decreasing the weight of them until the hems of shirts and pants began to float. It was then they noticed something was amiss, 3 heads swiveling around to find the source of the strangeness. When they finally spotted her, Achiko reversed the gravity, making their clothes as heavy as lead. The sudden change coupled with the immense weight sent all 3 to the ground, likely bruised and scraped but not harmed any further. She pulled out her phone, ready to send a message to the nearest hero agency via the hero communications system. "Are you all right? They didn't hurt you, did they?" When Achiko finally looked up to see the victim, she nearly fell to the ground as well in surprise. Before her stood Himiko, the main drummer for the Deaconess. "Oh wow, you're Himiko. It's such an honor to meet you." Himiko looked surprised at being recognized. She wore a plain black crop top and baggy pack pants, both splattered with red fabric paint to look like blood. Her nose and lip piercings were hidden behind a face mask, but her striking yellow eyes were still visible. Her signature blonde buns were gone. Her hair swept under a plain ball cap, but Achiko had been a longtime fan and could pick any one of the band members out of a crowd. She stepped over the criminals' prone figures, forgetting them entirely in her excitement. "I'm a really big fan of your music. You're so talented. I mean, you're all talented, but you're an amazing drummer. I loved that you got more drum solos on this latest album. It really showcases how talented you are." She was taller than Achiko, but not by much, and when she spoke, her voice was high and bright. "Oh hey, never expected a fan to come to my rescue. What's your name?" Achiko puffed out her chest. "I'm Dash." She paused. She couldn't give her hero name, not if Himiko hated heroes as much as Deka did. She knew she couldn't give her full name either, Not with 3 criminals she'd knocked down with little effort within earshot. She settled for her given name, hoping it wasn't too informal. I'm Achiko. Himiko pulled down her face mask to reveal a toothy smile, her canines long and sharp. It's great to meet you, Achiko. Thanks for the assist. She made to leave, but Achiko stopped her, reflexively grabbing her wrist. Wait, sorry, but shouldn't you stay to give a police report? These people attacked you in the middle of the day. Himiko laughed. Cops aren't really my thing, and I'd hate to be around if a hero shows up. I'd never live down the shame. Achiko's gut clenched. So she hated heroes too. That alone should have been a deterrent. But Achiko was nothing if not persistent. Well, would you at least let me put in the call? I'd hate to leave them here. Himiko tilted her head, scrutinizing her. All right, but as soon as the cops get here, I'm gone. Achiko sent the message quickly, knowing the heroes would simply pass the burden of collecting the criminals to local police. Something this trivial would be considered unworthy of any agency's time and, given the nature of the villains Achiko had seen during her work studies, she couldn't disagree. They stood together awkwardly, neither sure what to say to the other. Achiko's hands felt a bit clammy as she desperately thought of something to say. Meeting Deku had left her starstruck as well. But Himiko was a pretty girl on top of a rock star. For someone with a weakness to both, it made her all the more intimidating. Himiko took pity on her and started the conversation herself. So, you get involved in a lot of alley fights? Achiko laughed nervously. Not really, but I saw that you needed help and well, she gestured helplessly to the 3 bodies on the ground, all of whom had since abandoned any hope of getting back up. Himiko leaned toward her. It's illegal to use your quirk in public like that. You sure you don't want to make a run for it too? Tempting, but I have classes tomorrow. I go to UA High. The other girl's eyes widened. She let out a low whistle. Damn. My #1 fan is a prep school student? Never pictured that. Achiko preened at being labeled Himiko's #1 fan. I'm a scholarship student. No wealthy parents or anything like that. Just a lot of sleepless nights studying. You know, I'm actually in the same class as Deku. We were all so surprised to see him. But it was such an honor. Himiko was in front of her in an instant. Deku? You mean Izu? He's with you at UA. Achiko blushed at their proximity. Yeah, I'm a hero student. I know you and Deku don't like heroes, but I promise my class is nice. Well, most of us. But you can call him and ask. If she did, she would no doubt hear nothing but bad things about them. But Achiko was desperate to make a good impression. Himiko faltered for a moment. Call him. I can't, Achiko. He broke his phone before he left for UA and none of us have been able to contact him. Achiko felt her throat tighten. This could be her chance to fix things with Deku, only it would be brazen to ask this girl for her number. I could pass on a message for you? Her eyes were like gold, Achiko thought, the thin stream of sunlight breaking through the towering buildings hitting them and making them shine. You'd do that for me, Achiko? With eyes like hers, Achiko couldn't think of a single thing she wouldn't do for her. Oh, of course, Himi dash. Hands grabbed them both, and Achiko realized with dread that in her distraction she'd released her hold on the criminals. Her instincts kicked in, her elbow darting out and smashing one man squarely in the face. He reeled back and Achiko ducked, kicking his feet out from beneath him. She was on the next man before the first had hit the ground, trading blows as Himiko grappled with the woman. They were strong but untrained and even less coordinated, and it took only a bit more effort to restrain them than it had the first time. Sirens could be heard in the distance, Achiko's heart dropping as she realized their time was up. She's expected Himiko to bolt at the first sound of approaching authorities, but the other girl was watching her instead. She moved to stand in front of Achiko, her hand stroking the brunette's cheek and coming back bloody. It doesn't look too deep, but make sure you clean that cut. Achiko couldn't even feel it with her cheeks flushing and her chest pounding. Yeah. Don't worry, I'll be fine. This close, Achiko could see Himiko was no older than herself. She wished she could take her back to UA, to reunite her with Deku, but it was a crazed, fleeting thought. A phone was brought to her face. Number, please. Achiko entered it without thinking. Himiko smiled down at the screen. a soft and gentle smile that was at complete odds with her punk persona. Achiko thought it was cute. Thanks, I'll keep in touch. Get home safe, number one. The way she said it sounded like number one hero as much as it did number one fan, and it made Achiko hungry to hear it again. You too, Himiko. Later that night, after she'd collected her snacks, cleaned her face and assured her classmates she wasn't hurt, Achiko received a text that made her smile all through the night. When asked about it, she only shook her head and smiled harder.